Chapter 1. Into the Woods. The sun descended in a lazy, golden arc, casting elongated shadows through the dense thickets of blackthorn woods. The sprawling woodland, an enigmatic landscape unmarked on most maps, had long been the subject of hushed whispers and campfire stories in the small neighboring town of Eldermore. A dusty, battered jeep rolled along the narrow dirt path, crunching twigs and leaves beneath its worn tires. Within the vehicle, 5 friends eagerly talked, unaware of the terrors awaiting them. Driving was Caleb, dependable and level-headed, with rugged features set beneath tousled brown hair. Beside him sat Paige, his younger sister, whose curiosity often bordered on recklessness. Her vibrant red hair danced in the breeze, framing eager green eyes scanning the thickening shadows. In the back sat Simon, bespectacled and cautious, fidgeting with his camera. Beside him, Maya, who masked her discomfort behind humor and bravado. Lastly, Lucas, quiet and observant, stared intently out the window, sensing something others missed in the swaying trees. The jeep slowed to a halt at a clearing marked by a decrepit wooden sign reading, "Stay Out," painted crudely in faded red paint. "Charming welcome," Maya quipped dryly, masking unease with sarcasm. "Think of it as atmosphere," Paige retorted, hopping energetically from the jeep. They unpacked swiftly, laughter punctuating their efforts to dispel growing unease. Soon, tents arose beside a crackling campfire, smoke curling upward, lost amid towering pines. The daylight faded quickly, plunging the clearing into twilight, bringing with it an abrupt silence. The usual symphony of birds and insects suddenly muted, leaving behind an eerie void. "Did anyone else notice that?" Simon whispered anxiously, adjusting his glasses. "It's the woods. Quiet is good, right?" Maya forced a smile, though uncertainty flickered behind her eyes. Lucas, unusually withdrawn, stared deep into the surrounding darkness. Caleb watched him cautiously, sensing Lucas' unease. Lucas was sensitive, too sensitive, always tuned into something beyond their perception. "What's bothering you, Luke?" Caleb asked gently, keeping his voice calm. Lucas shook his head, finally breaking his gaze from the woods. "Nothing, probably." The group laughed nervously, the fire's comforting warmth easing their apprehension slightly. But the silence lingered, heavy and unsettling. After dinner, Caleb stood, stretching stiff limbs. "Who's up for exploring a bit?" Paige, energized by the thought, jumped up. "Definitely." Simon hesitated but reluctantly agreed, checking the battery on his camera. Maya, feigning enthusiasm, smiled half-heartedly. Lucas stayed seated. "You coming?" Caleb nudged softly. "Something feels wrong," Lucas muttered, eyes shadowed. "Come on, it'll clear your head," Caleb encouraged gently, pulling him up. The group slowly wandered from their campsite, their flashlight beams slicing through the pitch black, creating dancing shadows on the gnarled trunks of ancient pines. Deeper into the woods, Caleb paused, eyes narrowing. "Look at this." Ahead, a small clearing appeared illuminated under the waning moonlight. At its center stood a crudely made stone circle. Within the circle lay weathered, carved stones, each bearing faintly recognizable but mysterious symbols. Simon knelt cautiously, snapping pictures. "This doesn't look natural." Maya joked nervously, "If we find a witch's hut, I'm out of here." Paige walked closer, eyes wide with curiosity. Her fingertips traced the symbols carefully. "What do you think these mean?" Lucas, frozen at the clearing's edge, whispered, "Nothing good." Suddenly, from the darkness, a whisper emerged, soft, indistinct, chillingly close. Simon spun around, scanning with his flashlight. "Did you hear that?" They froze, ears straining. Silence enveloped them once again. Nervous glances passed between them. Caleb broke the tension. "It's probably just the wind in the trees." But the words lacked conviction. They returned to camp quickly, tense and unusually quiet. Sleep eluded most of them, haunted by distant whispers and phantom movements among shadows. Lucas stared into darkness, eyes wide, hearing whispers clearly, promising dark things to come. Unbeknownst to them, They had stepped into the territory of something ancient, awakened by their intrusion, something hungry, patient, and eager for fresh souls to torment. The woods watched. The woods listened. And as the campers finally drifted into troubled sleep, the woods smiled. It was only just beginning. Chapter 2: Unseen Eyes. Dawn struggled to pierce the dense canopy above, casting faint ribbons of light through the branches of blackthorn woods. The clearing where the group had set up camp looked different in the morning, still and too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but suffocates. Caleb awoke first, blinking against the dull grey light. His back ached from the uneven ground, and the air was unnervingly cold for early autumn. He sat up, rubbing his face, and listened. No birds. No wind. Just nothing. He stepped out of the tent and glanced around. Paige's tent was still zipped. Lucas lay awake in his own tent, eyes open, staring at the nylon ceiling. Simon and Maya were still asleep, curled up in their sleeping bags like children trying to hide from a bad dream. Caleb approached the fire pit, which was nothing more than a circle of cold ash now. As he bent down to brush leaves away, he saw footprints. Not theirs. These were bare, human footprints, circling the tent in the soft dirt. His stomach turned. The prints weren't fresh, they looked like they had been left during the night and were partially faded by morning dew. Caleb's throat tightened. Before he could decide what to do, a scream tore through the still air. It was Paige. Caleb ran. He found her outside her tent, staring at the trees with wide, tear-filled eyes. Her hair was tangled, her face pale. "I saw someone," she gasped. "Last night. Standing between the trees. Just standing there." Caleb glanced toward the tree line. The pine stood silent, unmoving. But he could feel it too, that invisible pressure of being watched. Lucas emerged slowly, looking worse than he had the night before. His eyes were sunken, lips chapped. "Something's here with us," he muttered. Simon and Maya joined them shortly after, still groggy but alert now from Paige's scream. Caleb hesitated, then pointed to the prints. "We weren't alone last night." Simon knelt and inspected them, going pale. "These are barefoot." "Why would someone be out here barefoot?" "There's more," Paige whispered. She reached into her tent and pulled out a strip of cloth. Torn, yellowed, and stained with something brownish. "This was under my bag this morning." The group gathered around it. The cloth smelled of rot. "This is not a joke, right?" Maya said, voice cracking. "No one's messing with us. Would anyone dare?" Caleb said quietly, scanning each of them. That day, they stayed close to camp, too shaken to explore. But the unease only grew. Strange symbols etched into nearby trees. Piles of sticks arranged in strange shapes appearing at the edge of the clearing. A low humming sound at dusk, like a swarm of insects, but there were none in sight. Lucas finally spoke as the sky dimmed. "I think the woods are testing us." Simon scoffed. "What the hell does that mean?" Lucas turned slowly. "Something old lives here. It knows we're here. And it's watching to see who breaks first." The fire that night burned hotter than before, though no one added more wood. The flames licked upward in unnatural patterns, casting shadows that seemed to twitch and shift behind them. As the group sat in silence, something moved at the edge of the clearing. A dark shape, humanoid, but slightly off. Its proportions wrong, like limbs bent the wrong way. Maya stood up. "Did you see that?" They all had. Caleb grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. "Empty." But Paige screamed again, not at the trees, but at the other side of the clearing. Another figure. Tall. Still. They turned wildly, light slicing through the dark, but every time they looked directly at the shape, it was gone. It only appeared in their peripheral vision, always just out of reach. "We're being surrounded," Lucas whispered. Then the whispering started. Soft. Incomprehensible. but maddening. Like dozens of voices speaking at once from the trees. Maya clutched her ears. "Make it stop. Please?" Simon dropped his camera, the lens cracking against a stone. "We need to go. Now." Paige shook her head. "It won't let us." "What do you mean it?" Caleb asked, heart pounding. Paige was trembling. "I dreamed last night, or maybe it wasn't a dream. Something touched me. It whispered to me. It wants one of us." The wind picked up, howling through the clearing, blowing out the fire in an instant. Darkness enveloped them. They scrambled for flashlights, but only Caleb's worked. Its beam flickered weakly. And in that trembling light, they saw it again. A figure. No face. No clothes. Just pale, stretched skin and too many joints. Standing no more than 10 feet away. Then it vanished. The group didn't sleep that night. Huddled together, clutching anything they could, they waited for morning. And deep in the trees, unseen eyes blinked open, hundreds of them. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. Chapter 3: The Lost Trail. By morning, the group had the worn, broken look of people who'd stared too long into something incomprehensible. Their voices were hushed, eyes sunken, and trust among them began to thin like mist under the weak sun. The fire pit sat cold and unused. No one had the nerve to approach it. "We need to leave," Simon said, breaking the silence. "Now. We pack up and go." Paige didn't argue this time. She had barely spoken since the night before. Her eyes were glassy, distant, like some part of her hadn't returned with the sunrise. Lucas stood at the edge of the camp, staring into the woods. "We won't find our way out." Caleb turned to him. "What are you talking about?" "I walked out there early this morning," Lucas said. "Just to check. I marked a tree every 10 steps. He held up a knife. The blade was rusted at the tip, as if something had aged it overnight. After 20 minutes, I was back at the same clearing. The marks were still there. The woods wrapped me back around. Maya's face twisted in disbelief. "No. That's not possible. We came in through a straight trail. We can walk out the same way." "No," Paige said, voice faint. "That trail is gone." Caleb turned to her. "What do you mean?" She slowly pointed. "I looked when the sun came up. There's no trail. Just trees. Thick. Like they were never cut. Like the forest grew back in hours." They followed her, skeptical, until they saw it with their own eyes. The narrow trail they had driven in on was gone. In its place stood a dense wall of bramble and pine, impossible to pass without blades, and even then, it felt wrong, as if it pushed back when touched. Simon pulled out his cracked camera and took a photo. The screen flickered. When he looked at the image, there was only static. Just like the night before. "We're trapped," Lucas muttered. "It doesn't want us to leave." Maya's panic returned fast, climbing up her throat. "No. No, no, no. That's not how this works. We're not in a movie. The woods don't trap people." Caleb tried to keep his voice calm. "We'll figure it out. If the trail's gone, we can make a new one. There's a sun. A direction. If we follow it, we'll reach a road or a river." Lucas shook his head. "You're thinking too logically. This place doesn't follow rules." But Caleb was already marching forward, his flashlight and compass in hand. The rest hesitated, then followed. What else could they do? They walked for over an hour, moving steadily east. Simon marked trees. Maya used her phone to track steps, no signal, but the GPS was still active. At 3.7 kilometers, they stopped. The clearing appeared again. The same clearing. The fire pit. Their tents. And something new. A wooden effigy, nailed crudely to a tree with long, jagged sticks. A headless humanoid shape, arms outstretched, with bones tied to its limbs. No one spoke for several seconds. It wasn't here before, Maya whispered. Simon walked around it slowly. Look at the wood. This thing's old. Years. Maybe decades. Lucas stepped closer. No. It's older. The bark is grown into it. Like it's been part of the tree. Then how did we miss it? Paige asked. Silence. Caleb walked up to it and tried to pull one of the sticks out. As soon as he touched it, the air seemed to shiver. The trees creaked in unison. A whisper swept through the woods, too faint to understand, but not imagined. Paige backed away. Don't touch it. But it was too late. Caleb's hand came away stained with something black and oily. It stank like rotten copper. He gagged. Suddenly Simon fell to his knees, clutching his ears. Stop! Stop it! There's nothing, Maya said, grabbing him. He screamed, then went silent, collapsing. Caleb rushed over, checking his pulse. He's alive. Faint. Breathing fast. What did he hear? Paige asked, shaking. Lucas looked toward the effigy. Not what? Who? What are you talking about? Caleb snapped. Lucas didn't answer. He walked toward the effigy again and stared at the base of the tree. There's something written here. Burned into the bark. He traced the letters slowly, his lips moving. Thorn does not forget. What does that mean? Maya asked. Lucas stepped back. It means someone's been here before. Simon came to with a shudder, eyes wide and unfocused. I saw her, he whispered. Who? Caleb asked. The girl. She was nailed to the tree instead of that thing. She was still alive. Screaming. They stared at him in horror. Simon continued, his voice shaking. There were people around her, dressed in old clothes. Masks made from bark and antlers. They were chanting. Laughing. And the forest was laughing with them. Paige clutched Caleb's arm. This place is cursed. Caleb swallowed hard, trying to keep the group grounded. Then we find the center. The source. Maybe it's a bluff, a ritual site. Something real we can destroy. There has to be a reason for all this. Maya looked at him like he was insane. You want to go deeper? No, Lucas said. He's right. Paige stared at him. You just said the woods don't follow rules. They don't. But if they have a heart, maybe that's where they're weakest. Simon muttered, it was near water. In the vision. A river or lake. The altar was near it. They looked at the map. The old forest survey showed a black dot labeled Thorns Hollow, with a blue stream leading through it. That's about 3 miles from here, Caleb said. They packed only the essentials, flashlights, food, knives, and left the rest behind. If they were going to break the curse, it had to be soon. They all felt it. Something was closing in. The path narrowed as they went east. The forest grew darker, as if the sun itself was reluctant to shine there. Trees bent over them like ancient giants leaning in to whisper forgotten truths. They walked for hours. And then they found the path again. But not the one they took in. This one was lined with torches, unlit, but fresh. As if waiting to be used. And beyond them, something moved. A figure. Hunched. Watching. Then it turned and vanished into the woods. Follow it, Caleb said. The others stared at him. It wants us to, Paige whispered. Yes, Lucas replied. But we need to know why. And so, they stepped off the marked path. And into the unknown. Chapter 4, The Whispering begins. The path the figure had taken twisted unnaturally, lined with roots that rose like fingers from the earth. The forest here was thicker, the trees older, bark cracked like withered flesh. The very air changed, heavier, colder, as if they'd passed through an invisible veil into another time. No one spoke for the first half-mile. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the labored breathing of 5 people already running low on courage. Then the whispers started. They didn't rise suddenly. They crept in, barely audible at first, like the rustling of wind through dead leaves. Paige stopped, her eyes darting around. "Did you hear that?" The others froze. There it was again. A soft murmuring, layered like a crowd talking just out of sight. But the cadence was all wrong. The voices overlapped in unnatural ways, one voice laughing while another cried, another whispering words none of them recognized. Simon clutched his head. No. No, not again. "Don't listen," Caleb ordered. "It's not real." But it was. The whispering grew louder the deeper they went. Then came the names. "Caleb." A woman's voice, soft and melodic, coming from just to his left. He turned sharply. Nothing was there. "Maya." This one was deep, masculine, and came from above, like something watching from the branches. "Who's doing that?" Maya yelled. "How do they know our names?" Lucas didn't look surprised. "They know everything. They've been listening longer than we've been alive." "You're not helping," Paige snapped. Lucas glanced at her, then walked forward. The path ended in a hollow, just as the map suggested. A ring of jagged stone formations jutted out like crooked teeth. In the center, surrounded by rotting totems and crumbled bones, was a stone altar, moss-covered and stained a rusty brown. No one moved for a long moment. Then Paige let out a gasp. The altar had fresh blood on it. Still glistening. Still warm. Simon stumbled back. "No. We're too late." "Too late for what?" Caleb asked. Simon looked at him, eyes wide. "The ritual. It's already begun." Then the air shifted. The whispers stopped. In the sudden silence, the forest exhaled. And something stepped into the clearing. It looked human, but only barely. Its limbs were stretched unnaturally long, and its skin was pale, tight against its bones like wax. Its face was featureless except for a jagged slit where its mouth should be, currently grinning far too wide. No eyes. No nose. Just that mouth. That gaping smile. It didn't walk. It floated, feet inches off the ground, drifting silently toward them. Maya screamed. "Run!" They scattered, Paige and Simon one way, Caleb, Maya, and Lucas the other. But no matter how fast they moved, the trees didn't cooperate. Branches whipped at them. Roots tripped them. The forest didn't want them gone. Caleb crashed through a wall of thorny brush, dragging Maya behind him. Lucas followed, bleeding from his forehead. Behind them, the creature didn't chase. It simply watched, that grin never changing. They collapsed in another small clearing. What the hell was that? Maya cried. Lucas finally answered. It's the Whisperer. They turned to him. He swallowed. I read about it. In the journal we found in the cabin. The one with the burned pages. You never told us, Caleb said, furious. I didn't think it would actually. What does it want? Maya asked. Lucas paused. It doesn't want anything. It feeds. On fear. On secrets. On guilt. It knew our names, Caleb said. Lucas nodded. It knows everything you try to hide. It becomes what you're most afraid of. Sometimes all at once. Caleb sat heavily on a fallen log, breathing hard. We need to regroup. Find Paige and Simon. Then we get the hell out of here. They might not be alive, Maya said. Caleb glared at her. Don't say that. No, seriously, she insisted, lowering her voice. What if they're not them anymore? Lucas stood. Either way, we're going to find out. Meanwhile, Paige and Simon stumbled into a different part of tree. It was breathing. Paige, he said, grabbing her arm. Look! Ahead, through the trees, was a cabin. Small, rotting, leaning sideways. But the chimney was still puffing smoke. Was this on the map? Paige asked. No. But they walked toward it anyway. The door creaked open before they touched it. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of blood and mildew. The walls were covered in photos, black and white, faded, dozens of them. Faces of terrified people, eyes wide, mouths open mid-scream. Simon stepped closer and recognized something in one of the photos. Himself. From yesterday. Paige turned slowly to him. That's me. All 5 of them were in the photos. Some smiling. Some running. One of them, Lucas, was pictured burning. And there was one more photo, freshly pinned, still wet. It was Simon, lying on the cabin floor, his eyes gouged out. He turned just in time to see Paige's eyes roll back as she collapsed, her body twitching violently. The last thing he heard before blacking out was the whisper. One must die. The rest must remember. Chapter 5, Shadow Figures. Caleb, Lucas, and Maya moved cautiously through the twisting trees, calling for Paige and Simon every few minutes. The forest didn't echo, it absorbed their voices, like the trees were drinking their sound. Paige! Maya shouted, her voice breaking. No answer. No birds. No wind. Just the oppressive, humid silence and that awful feeling that something was following, no, watching, them. The hairs on Caleb's arms never settled. He kept his knife drawn, though he doubted it would be useful against whatever lived in this forest. Lucas stopped suddenly. What? Caleb whispered. Lucas didn't answer. He was staring at something between 2 trees ahead, something almost human. A silhouette. Tall, still, perfectly motionless. It didn't breathe. Didn't sway. It looked like a person, but the edges were wrong. Blurry. Unstable. Like it was being projected onto the trees by a broken film reel. Is that? Maya began. Then it stepped sideways. Not walked, slid. Effortless. Gliding into shadow. And then there were 3 more figures. Identical silhouettes. All standing in a wide arc around them. Still. Watching. Run, Caleb whispered. They ran. The figures didn't move at first. But the moment they broke into a sprint, the shadows followed, no footfalls, no noise. Just shapes flitting between the trees, faster than anything human. The forest blurred as they ran. The terrain didn't make sense, hilltops that led to basins, trails that curved and looped in impossible ways. They passed the same boulder 3 times in under 10 minutes. Lucas was the first to stop. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. We're going in circles. Caleb wheeled around. Where's Maya? They both froze. She was gone. Maya! Caleb shouted. No answer. Only silence. And then, laughter. Not from a mouth. From everywhere. Low. Whispered. Mocking. Caleb spun in place, holding his flashlight high, but the beam flickered and died. The battery was full. He'd just checked it. Lucas grabbed his arm. Don't panic. She was right here, Lucas. A snapping twig behind them made them freeze. They turned slowly. It was Maya. Or something wearing her face. She stood just 10 feet away, head tilted at an unnatural angle, her mouth stretched open, hanging wide as if her jaw had been dislocated. Her eyes were wrong, milky, pupils too small, and she didn't blink. "Help me," she said. But her lips didn't move. The voice came from behind them. They turned, nothing. Back to her, gone. Lucas was shaking now. "It's playing with us. Showing us what we fear." Caleb's chest heaved. "Where's the real Maya?" "I don't know." They stood in silence for what felt like minutes. Then, branches cracking to the north. They ran toward the sound. Eventually, they reached a small rise. At the top, they saw it, the cabin. The same one Paige and Simon had found. Smoke still rose from the chimney. "Please let them be there," Caleb muttered. They pushed the warp door open. Inside, the air was thick and wet with decay. The walls, as Paige and Simon had seen earlier, were covered in old black and white photos of terrified people, some screaming, others mid-death. Dozens of faces, all in agony. Then they found them. Paige was lying in the corner, pale, blood trickling from her ears. Still breathing, but barely. Simon lay nearby, twitching in his sleep, whispering to himself over and over, "Don't look at it, don't look at it, don't look at it." Caleb rushed to Paige's side. "Hey! Paige, wake up! It's me." She didn't stir. Lucas hovered over Simon. He's trapped in a vision. What kind of vision? Lucas looked around the room. Something this place feeds them. Makes them live it over and over. Whatever it is, it's what they fear most. Caleb noticed something new. A journal. Bound in leather. Sitting open on the table. He picked it up. The entries were written in frantic, looping cursive. "The forest chose us. Said one must be taken every 7th year. The price for stepping where we shouldn't. I heard the voices too. I saw them, shadow men with no eyes. I tried to run. We all did. Only I survived. But I didn't really. Not after what I saw. Not after the altar." Another entry. "The whisperer lives under the hollow. Beneath the stone. It is old. It is watching. It never leaves. We just forget until it wants us to remember. Until we come back." Lucas looked over Caleb's shoulder. "The hollow?" "It's under us," Caleb said. "You think it means literally?" Lucas nodded. "There's a basement." They searched the cabin and found a trapdoor under a moldy rug. It was sealed with a rusted iron bolt. They hesitated. And then Simon's eyes snapped open. He screamed, pointing at the trapdoor. "Don't open it. That's where it lives." They froze. He was sitting up now, gasping. "I saw it. Under the floor. 1,000 mouths whispering at once. It wants us to come down. It needs us to come down. We have to," Lucas said, trembling. "If we don't face it, it'll pick us off. One by one." Caleb unlatched the bolt. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing stone steps spiraling downward. A foul wind blew out from the blackness below. It smelled of grave dirt and rotting meat. Simon held Paige close. "You're not going down there." Caleb met his eyes. "I'm not letting this thing win. Whatever it is. However it works." Lucas nodded. They descended. The air grew colder with every step. The walls were made of rough stone, carved with symbols too old to translate. The staircase twisted deeper than should have been possible, spiraling into the earth for what felt like miles. Finally, they reached the bottom. It opened into a massive cavern, lit by flickering torchlight from no visible source. And there, in the center, stood an altar of black stone, covered in fresh blood. Around it, dozens of shadow figures. Silent. Watching. As they stepped into the room, all the figures slowly turned to face them. None had faces. None had eyes. and all of them looked exactly like the 5 campers. Chapter 6: Abandoned Cabin. The doppelgangers stood motionless, each one mirroring the group's appearance, same height, same clothes, same posture, but their skin was ashen, featureless, like mannequins carved from smoke and dust. They made no sound, just stared with their eyeless faces. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. "They're us." Lucas stepped closer, eyes wide. Reflections. Shadows of who we are. Or maybe who we were. From behind them, the trapdoor slammed shut. The sound echoed through the cavern like a thunderclap, and the torches lining the stone walls flared brighter, casting tall, jerking shadows across the curved surfaces. Caleb turned and ran back up the stone steps, pounding against the trapdoor from below. It didn't budge. "No good," he muttered, returning. The altar in the center of the chamber began to hum, deep, guttural, a vibration they felt in their teeth and bones. Blood began to seep from its cracks, spreading out in spiraling patterns across the floor. Lucas clutched his chest. "It's pulling something out of us." The doppelgangers began to move. Not walking, gliding. Slowly approaching, hands rising in unnatural synchronization. Caleb drew his knife. "Get ready." "No." Lucas hissed. "Don't touch them." "Why?" "They're linked to us. If you hurt one, you might be hurting yourself." Paige stirred weakly in Simon's arms above, eyes fluttering. "I can hear them," she murmured. "They're whispering, the forest is inside them." The cavern trembled. A fissure split in the altar, widening. A black column of smoke erupted from it, spinning rapidly, forming a figure. The Whisperer. Fully formed now. Its presence was impossible to ignore, every instinct screamed to run, to close your eyes, to forget. But it was too late for forgetting. The creature loomed over the altar, a towering shape cloaked in swirling smoke and flesh. Its elongated face was cracked like porcelain, mouth stitched with black thread. From within, a low groaning began, hundreds of voices at once, whispering and moaning in dissonant harmony. It spoke, but not aloud. It pushed thoughts into their minds. "You opened the door. The pact is broken. The blood is owed." Lucas staggered back. "What do you mean, a pact?" The first settlers swore silence. No light. No voices. No names. They broke it. And now you are the consequence. Suddenly, each shadow clone merged with their corresponding person. One by one. Simon screamed as his double collided with him, vanishing into his chest. Maya, still somewhere above in the woods, would feel it too, wherever she was. Caleb felt a surge of cold rush through him as his shadow passed into his body. For a moment, he saw images. A bleeding forest floor, a group of masked villagers dragging bodies to the altar, a girl screaming as the forest devoured her face. Then it stopped. They were alone again. Except for the Whisperer. It drifted down, just inches above the ground, head cocked. It opened its stitched mouth, and thousands of black centipedes poured from the wound, writhing across the stone floor toward them. Caleb grabbed Lucas and pulled him back. "Go! Up the stairs!" But the staircase was gone. Vanished. The tunnel that had led down here had sealed itself into solid rock. Trapped. Lucas stood frozen. "There's no way out." Simon, still panting from the possession, muttered, "This is it. This is where it ends." "No," Caleb said, scanning the walls. "There's always a way out." The Whisperer's centipedes pulled across the floor, circling the altar. They formed symbols, sprawling, ancient, and very much alive. They pulsed with red light. Then, Lucas stepped forward. "I think I know what it wants." "Lucas, no. It's not killing us yet because it needs us. The ritual's incomplete. It needs a sacrifice." Simon shook his head. "We already bled. We already screamed. What more does it want?" Lucas turned, slowly. A choice! The whisperer stopped moving. The buzzing sound of insects ceased. Even the blood beneath the altar stilled. Caleb looked around, heart pounding. "What are you saying?" Lucas's voice was eerily calm. "We've all felt it. The forest isn't killing everyone. Just the ones who fight back. The ones who resist. But it lets some walk out." Simon stepped closer. "What the hell are you suggesting?" Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly to the altar and climbed on top of it. "No." Caleb lunged, but it was too late. Lucas turned, a faint smile on his lips. "I saw what happens if we don't finish this. The whole forest dies. The curse spreads. And no one walks out alive." Caleb yelled. "Get down from there. That thing is manipulating you." Lucas raised his arms. "Maybe. But maybe it's right." The whisperer approached, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, a single word echoed through the cavern. "Remember." The whisperer touched Lucas's chest with a long, jagged finger. There was a blinding flash of light. And Lucas was gone. Not torn. Not burned. Just erased. The altar cracked down the middle. The centipedes dissolved into smoke. The doppelgangers vanished. And the stone steps returned. Caleb and Simon stood in stunned silence. Above them, they heard a sound they hadn't heard in hours. Birds. Real birds. Chirping. The forest had gone quiet. But not the suffocating silence from before. It was peaceful. Natural. And the trap door was open. Caleb climbed the stairs slowly, then reached back to help Simon. Outside, the air was clean. Crisp. The photos inside the cabin had turned to ash. Paige was still lying in the corner, but her eyes were open now. Clear. "What happened?" she asked, groggy. Caleb knelt beside her, tears in his eyes. "Lucas saved us." They stepped out into the woods. The sun had risen again. A path lay before them. Straight. Familiar. The original trail they had entered on. Simon looked behind them. "Do you think it's over?" Caleb didn't answer. Because behind the trees, just beyond the light, he could still feel it. Watching. Waiting. Whispering. Chapter 7, The First Victim. 3 days had passed since the forest released them. The town of Eldamore hadn't changed. The streets were still quiet, the gas station still dusty, and the mountains still looming behind rows of sagging rooftops. No one noticed anything unusual when Caleb, Paige, and Simon walked back into town, covered in scratches, caked in mud, with their eyes hollow and sunburned. No one even asked about Lucas. They never called the police. What could they say? A forest god made of smoke and teeth consumed our friend to stop a century-old blood pact. Simon wanted to try. Caleb stopped him. It would sound like grief, trauma, or madness. The three of them stayed at Caleb and Paige's house that night. None of them slept. Simon stared at the ceiling until dawn. Paige sat in the corner of her room with the lamp on, rocking slowly, humming to herself, a tune none of them recognized. Caleb stood at the window, staring at the woods in the distance. The next day, Simon left. Said he needed to get away. Somewhere far from pine needles, old cabins, and his own reflection. They didn't blame him. But on the 5th night, the whispers returned. It was Paige who heard them first. She woke at 2:13 a.m. The house was cold. Too cold. The windows were all shut. No draft. No storm outside. Yet she could see her breath. And then the voice. Soft. Faint. Coming from under her bed. "Paige!" She screamed. Caleb burst in moments later, brandishing the fireplace poker. What? What happened? Paige pointed to the bed, trembling. Something called my name. They checked. Nothing. No footprints. No markings. But the cold lingered. That morning, Paige didn't speak. At all. She stared at her food for hours before walking outside barefoot, stopping only when she reached the tree line. Caleb found her there, standing with her hand against the bark of a pine tree. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked at him slowly. "It's lonely," she whispered. "It misses us." Caleb's stomach turned. 2 days later, Simon's mother called. He hadn't returned her messages. Hadn't shown up in Portland like he said. Hadn't been online. Paige's eyes went wide. It took him. "No," Caleb said firmly. He left. He needed space. But when they drove to his apartment that night, something felt wrong the moment they opened the door. Simon's things were still packed. His suitcase sat by the door, untouched. The apartment smelled like damp leaves. And carved into the wall above his bed was a message. One escaped. One must pay. Paige screamed. Simon's body was found the next morning. At the edge of Eldamore's reservoir, floating face up, his eyes missing, and his lips stitched closed with coarse black thread. Just like the Whisperer. The police called it suicide. Paige and Caleb knew better. At the funeral, Paige didn't cry. She sat still, her eyes distant. When the pastor asked if anyone had words to share, Caleb looked at her and saw something in her expression, resignation. Like she had already accepted that this wasn't over. That it would never be over. That night, back at the house, Caleb found her sitting in the living room, holding Lucas's journal. "I don't remember bringing this back," he said. "I didn't either," she replied. But there it was. The last page, previously blank, now contained a new entry. The ink was still wet. The Whisperer chooses one to mark, and one to mourn. One walks, one drowns. One speaks, one listens. The forest never forgets. It only waits. Caleb touched the page. The ink smudged like blood. Then he heard it. From the hallway. From the mirror. From the trees outside. "Caleb." They were out. But the forest was not done. It had marked them. And as Caleb lay awake that night, his reflection watching him just a second too long, he realized. Lucas hadn't sacrificed himself to stop the curse. He had only delayed it. And now it was moving again. Patient. Hungry. And ready to claim its first victim. Chapter 8. Panic Rising. By the end of the week, Caleb had nailed blankets over every mirror in the house. It started with the bathroom. The reflection didn't follow his movements one morning. He blinked, and his mirrored self just stared. It had no pupils. Just pale grey voids. When he turned away, the mirror shattered behind him. That night, he heard whispering inside the walls. Not under the floorboards. Not outside. Inside. Paige had barely spoken since Simon's funeral. She no longer ate dinner with him. She would stand by the window every evening as the sun went down, murmuring something he couldn't understand, words in a language he didn't recognize. Sometimes, her fingers twitched as if counting invisible steps. Caleb tried to reach out to someone, anyone, but every phone call dropped into static. His emails bounced. Social media accounts vanished without a trace. It was like they were erased from the world. And still, every night, the forest came closer. He could feel it pressing against the edges of town, like shadows slipping under locked doors, curling into pipes and crawling along power lines. He noticed dead birds near the house. No visible injuries. Just lifeless, eyes gone. Then the dreams returned. Always the same, he stands in the center of the blackthorn woods, alone. The trees twist and breathe. The altar is still there, now covered in hundreds of hands reaching out of the stone. Lucas stands across from him, his mouth sewn shut, eyes pleading. And behind Lucas, the whisperer rises from the ground like smoke from a corpse fire. Each night, it gets closer. Each time, Lucas reaches for him. Each time, Caleb wakes with scratches on his arms. And now, others were noticing. It started small. A man down the street was found walking circles in his backyard at 3 a.m., whispering about the tall man behind the trees. A woman in the next neighborhood crashed her car into a tree and screamed to the paramedics that the forest was in her head. Then, one afternoon, Paige disappeared. Caleb returned from a drive to find her room empty. Her bed unmade. Her window wide open. He searched for hours, eventually finding her in the town library. Sitting in the dark. Alone. Dozens of open books lay scattered around her, volumes on folklore, ancient rituals, missing persons. When he called her name, she didn't look up. She was drawing. A spiral, over and over again, on the wooden table in pen, so hard the ink bled through. He touched her shoulder. She screamed. But it wasn't her voice. It was Simon's. She clutched her head, eyes wide, mouth trembling. It's in me now. It knows my name. It's walking through my thoughts like they're trees. Paige, Caleb said gently, we need to leave. We need to go far away. It doesn't matter, she whispered. There's no distance. The whisperer isn't in the woods anymore. She finally looked up at him. It's in us. They left Eldamore that night. No bags. No phone. Just a car, a map, and two shattered souls trying to outrun a curse older than the trees themselves. They drove for days, south, then east, changing highways, ditching roads, avoiding forests. But with every mile, the signs returned. Trees dying along the roadsides. Static on every radio station. Shadows crossing the highway with no source. By the sixth night, Caleb saw someone standing on the shoulder as they passed a rural town. A man in old-time clothes. Wearing a bark mask. Holding a lantern with no flame. He turned his head slowly as they passed, and Caleb swore the man had Lucas's eyes. He didn't tell Paige. They booked a motel outside a desolate farming town in Kansas. Windowless, concrete-walled, quiet. Caleb laid down. He dreamed again. This time, Paige stood at the altar. Whispers poured from her mouth like black fog. Lucas stood beside her, blind, mouth sewn shut, weeping silently. The whisperer rose again, but this time, it wore Caleb's face. He awoke screaming. Paige was gone. Again. This time, her bed was empty, but the spiral symbol was drawn across the walls, ceiling, and her own skin. Black ink etched into her arms, spirals upon spirals. And on the mirror, in foggy writing. He paid the debt. You must carry the memory. Caleb collapsed. And that's when he realized. Lucas didn't die to end the curse. He died to trap it. And now, Caleb had brought it with him. From that moment on, he knew there would be no running. No safety. Only one option left. Go back. Chapter 9, Secrets Unearthed. Caleb returned to Blackthorn Woods on the 13th day. He parked the car at the edge of Eldamore, near the rusted no trespassing sign where their jeep had once stopped. The air was unnaturally still, like the trees were holding their breath. Paige hadn't come with him. She was institutionalized now. After a gas station clerk found her wandering barefoot on Route 9, mumbling about mouths in the earth. She didn't recognize Caleb when he visited. She only repeated one phrase. You can't forget what was planted in you. He didn't tell her he was going back. Because deep down, Caleb knew this had never been about escaping. It had always been about remembering. He crossed into the tree line just after sundown. The forest greeted him immediately. The trail reappeared as if it had always been waiting, untouched, overgrown, but unmistakably familiar. The scent of pine needles and mildew crept into his nostrils, and he felt it, the air press against him like a body too close in a small room. His flashlight flickered. He didn't bother checking the batteries. Let it happen. He deserved to see it through. After less than an hour, he found it again, Thorn's Hollow. The clearing. The stones. The altar. But something was different now. It was breathing. The ground rose and fell in gentle undulations, as if the earth were a massive lung. The altar pulsed faintly with light, not the reddish hue from before, but a pale, greenish glow, like phosphorescent moss. He stepped into the clearing. Instantly, the whispering resumed. It came from below. From inside the stone. Caleb didn't run. He walked to the altar, running his fingers over the cracks. They weren't cracks anymore. They were veins. Alive. He crouched, pressing his ear to the surface. At first, only a hum. Then voices. Familiar ones. It wasn't always like this. They begged the forest for safety. They fed it what they feared most. Then, Lucas's voice. They sealed it inside memory. And now, someone must carry it again. Caleb staggered back. The altar shimmered, and slowly, as if drawn out by memory, a shape began to form from the stone. A door. No handle. No lock. Just a rectangular outline in the rock, pulsing slowly. He touched it. The stone melted under his hand, revealing a staircase spiraling down. The same one Lucas had taken. The same one Caleb thought had collapsed. The forest had opened it again. He descended. No light this time. Just darkness. But his eyes adjusted too quickly. As if the dark wanted him to see. The tunnel was narrow, walls slick with something that felt like sweat. Roots grew across the ceiling like veins, pulsing in time with some distant heartbeat. At the bottom, a chamber. Not like before. Larger. Cathedral-like. The ceiling arched above him, covered in carvings, depictions of sacrifices, villagers in bark masks, twisted trees sprouting from human spines. In the center stood a stone monolith, covered in the same spiral pattern Paige had etched on the motel walls. And beside it, a book, bound in human skin, open to a blank page. Caleb stepped closer, heart pounding. Then it wrote itself. In black ink, fresh and bleeding. Your memories feed it. Your guilt binds it. Your silence keeps it. Then the next page turned. A drawing appeared, primitive, charcoal sketched. A circle of people, all holding hands. In the center, a child with no eyes, mouth open in a silent scream. Above them, the whisperer. The page turned again. They were the first. You are the last. He felt dizzy. Then, the chamber shifted. The walls moved, pulling back. And they emerged. Figures from his memory, Lucas, Simon, Paige, even himself, but all distorted. Lucas's mouth was still stitched. Paige's arms were covered in spirals. Simon held his camera, but the lens had eyes. They stood around him. Silent. Waiting. Then, one by one, they opened their mouths. And from each, a voice emerged, not their own. The whisperer. You returned. You are ready. Take the memory. Carry it forward. Plant it in another. Caleb shook his head. No. I came to stop this. The Lucas figure stepped forward, pointing to the book. There is no stopping. Only remembering. The book's pages turned faster now, images flashing, faces he didn't know, centuries of victims, sacrifices, names carved into trees, whispers sealed into the bark, families that vanished, towns that disappeared, cultures that fed the forest so it would forget them. And then, a blank page. Waiting. The shadows all turned to Caleb. He understood now. The curse was never about punishment. It was about preservation. The forest consumed fear, and someone had to carry its memory, so it wouldn't consume the world. Caleb took the book. He felt his name bleed into the page. And all at once, the voices stopped. The darkness faded. The forest let out a sigh. And he awoke. Back at the clearing. It was morning. Birdsong returned. His flashlight lay beside him. No altar. No whispers. No path. Just trees. Quiet. Alive. He stood, the book clutched in his hand. Its pages blank again. He knew what to do. Leave Eldamore. Start over. Watch. Wait. And when the forest called again. When someone else returned, as they always would. He would give them the book. He would show them the path. And they would take the memory. Just like he did. Because Blackthorn Woods never dies. It only waits. And remembers. Chapter 10, The Hidden Altar. 3 years later. The town of Eldamore had changed. Not in appearance, its storefronts were still faded, the forest still pressed tightly around its borders, and the roads still cracked from age, but in atmosphere. Something deeper. Subtler. A quiet tension in the air. Like the whole place was holding its breath. The townsfolk didn't talk about the woods anymore. The trailhead was overgrown now, but everyone knew better than to clear it. More than once, hikers tried. They didn't come back. But curiosity never dies. Especially not in outsiders. Which is how for students from the University of Grasmere arrived one humid August afternoon, Evelyn, a folklore major obsessed with forgotten places, Darren, her skeptical boyfriend, Taylor, an amateur filmmaker chasing internet fame, and Marcus, the quiet one with too much family history in Eldamore. They were there for a documentary. Whispers of Blackthorn, the forest Eldamore forgot. Evelyn was the one who found the book. It was left anonymously in their motel room on the first night, bound in cracked leather, brittle pages, no title. The first page was blank, but on the second was a single sentence written in ink so black it seemed to absorb the light. If you found this, the forest chose you. At first, they assumed it was a prank. But Marcus paled when he touched the cover. I've seen this before. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He hesitated. My uncle. Caleb. He disappeared in Eldamore. Years ago. After my cousin died. Everyone said he snapped. That he left behind some kind of journal. Do you think this was his? Darren asked. Marcus shrugged. Maybe. The next morning, they entered the woods. Taylor filmed everything, grinning behind the lens. Let's go viral. Marcus said nothing. The tree swallowed them. It started like any hike. Chatter. Bugs. Leaves crunching underfoot. But within the hour, the path changed. The GPS spun in circles. Evelyn's compass pointed in all directions. Taylor's camera glitched constantly. Then Evelyn found it. A small, rotted sign nailed to a tree. Barely legible. Thorns Hollow. Is this on the map? Darren asked. No, Marcus whispered. They pressed on anyway. Soon, the trees began to change. The trunks twisted into strange shapes. Some resembled people, bodies bent in agony. Others had symbols carved into them. Spirals. Eyes. Open mouths. The group stopped when they reached the clearing. The altar was there again. Whole. Rebuilt. Alive. Taylor zoomed in on it, oblivious. Look at that. God, this is perfect. Evelyn ran her hand over the stone. It pulsed under her touch. Then the whispering began. So soft. So subtle. like the sound of wind through leaves, except there was no wind. Darren spun around. Did you hear that? The book slipped from Evelyn's bag and hit the dirt, pages fluttering. The spiral symbol was drawn across the next page. Beneath it, a phrase. You woke it. That's when the ground beneath them cracked. A low rumble echoed through the trees. Birds fled in every direction. Taylor dropped the camera. From the cracks, hands emerged. Not full bodies. Just hands. Reaching. Grasping. They screamed and ran, but only Marcus hesitated. He looked back at the altar. At the book. At the tree behind it, where his uncle's name had been freshly carved. Caleb Monroe's memory bearer. He understood then. This wasn't a discovery. It was a handoff. The forest hadn't been waiting for victims. It had been waiting for a replacement. That night, Evelyn dreamed of fire. In her vision, the altar burned. Figures in bark masks danced around it, chanting, laughing, whispering in a dozen dead languages. In the center, Caleb stood, arms spread, mouth sewn shut. She woke up screaming. The others were already awake, none of them had slept. Not really. Outside the tent, spirals were carved into the dirt in perfect circles. Darren was the first to crack. We have to go. Now. This is wrong. Just one more day, Evelyn insisted. We're close to something. Close to what? Marcus snapped. The forest wants you to think that. Taylor stood by the edge of camp, eyes wide. Guys? They turned. Just past the trees, a figure. Tall. Faceless. Watching. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It only breathed. They left everything behind. They ran until their legs gave out. But the forest didn't let them leave. The trail vanished. Time warped. Hours passed. Then days. And by the third day, Taylor was gone. Simply vanished in the night. They found his camera the next morning. Inside were clips he never showed them. He had filmed himself whispering to the trees. And in the final video, he stood at the altar and said one thing before disappearing into the dark. I remember now. I was always meant to come back. When Evelyn opened the book again, it had more pages now. Her handwriting. Words she didn't remember writing. Sketches of rituals. Drawings of the Whisperer. Maps of trails she'd never seen, but recognized. And on the final page, a new name appeared. Not hers. Marcus. Followed by the words. Memory passed. That night, Marcus didn't return to camp. And Evelyn understood. The altar had chosen him. Just like it had chosen Caleb. The forest needed someone to carry the secret. To keep it alive. And now, it was hers to forget. If she could. Chapter 11, The Ritual Begins. Marcus returned just before dawn. Evelyn awoke to the soft rustle of leaves and found him standing by the dying campfire, soaked to the waist in mud and blood. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, and his lips were moving, but no sound came out. Marcus, she whispered. He turned slowly. His face was pale, streaked with dried tears. The pupils in his eyes had shrunk to pinpricks, and when he finally spoke, it was not with his own voice. The cycle begins again. Darren stumbled from his tent, still half asleep, but froze when he saw Marcus. What the hell? Marcus collapsed. The book lay beside him, open to a fresh page. A single phrase had appeared in large, uneven letters. Witness the unsealing. And underneath, the spiral symbol, this time drawn in blood. Evelyn clutched Marcus's face in her hands. What happened? Where did you go? He blinked slowly, as if waking from a coma. There was a door. Under the altar. I opened it. Darren backed away. Why? What the hell did you do? I didn't choose it, Marcus said. It chose me. The wind shifted. A deep howl echoed from the forest. Not an animal. Not wind. Something older. The ground shuddered. And from the clearing, a faint red glow lit the sky. Evelyn knew. The altar had awakened. They returned that afternoon, following Marcus's lead. He moved with eerie certainty, like someone who had walked the path in 1,000 dreams. The clearing was different now. The altar had split down the middle, revealing a stairwell carved into the earth, exactly as Caleb once described in his lost journals. The forest pulsed around them. The trees seemed to lean inward, curving protectively over the hole, as if they too feared what was beneath. Marcus stopped at the edge. "You don't have to follow me," he said. But Evelyn stepped beside him. "We do." They descended. The staircase was slick with moisture and bone-dry blood. Spiral symbols carved into the stone walls pulsed with a faint, internal light. The deeper they went, the louder the whispers became, layered voices bleeding into each other, some sobbing, others chanting, and one familiar voice repeating over and over. "Take the memory. Carry it. Feed it." They reached the bottom. The underground chamber had changed. It was vast now, like a cathedral carved beneath the earth. Hundreds of totems made from bone and moss stood in rows, each with a face painted on it. Every face was someone they knew. Taylor. Paige. Simon. Caleb. And at the far end of the chamber, a stone circle stood, surrounded by unlit torches and carved masks nailed to the walls. Marcus walked toward it without hesitation. The altar in the center had reformed. But this time, there were 3 stone slots carved into its surface. And next to the altar stood a figure. A woman in tattered robes. Her face was veiled with stitched bark. She held an old lantern. No flame, just darkness swirling inside the glass. Evelyn froze. "Who?" The woman raised her hand. "The keeper returns." Marcus knelt. "I'm ready," he said. The woman reached into the altar, her arm vanishing into the stone, and withdrew a spinal cord, still dripping, still twitching. Evelyn gagged. Darren turned to leave. But the chamber sealed behind them, the staircase dissolving into roots. The woman turned to Evelyn. 3 must witness. 3 must remember. She handed Evelyn the book. It had changed. Now bound in skin that breathed. The cover pulsed with a heartbeat. Evelyn opened it. The pages were full of names. Hundreds. Thousands. Some scratched out. Some glowing. And on the final page, her own name had appeared. Above it, a question. "Will you carry it?" She looked at Marcus. He had stepped into the center of the stone circle now, standing between 2 totems. The ground beneath him shimmered. The woman raised the spinal cord high above his head. The ritual had begun. The torches burst into flame, green fire that didn't crackle or burn. Darren screamed and ran toward the wall, slamming his fists against it. Roots pulled him back. They wrapped around his arms, his legs, his mouth, forcing him to kneel beside the altar. The whisperer's voice filled the chamber. "You were warned. One must carry. One must burn. One must bleed." The stone around Marcus lit up with spirals. The woman lowered the spinal cord onto his head. He didn't flinch. The moment it touched him, he began to scream. But it wasn't pain. It was knowledge. Visions filled his mind, wars lost to silence, villages swallowed by roots, generations who bartered children to keep the forest sleeping. And beneath it all, a seed. The whisperer itself. Buried, waiting to bloom. He was not becoming the memory bearer. He was becoming the soil. The woman stepped away. Marcus's eyes turned black. He opened his mouth. Smoke poured out. And Evelyn understood. The Whisperer wasn't a god. It was a story that needed to be told. Again and again. In order to live. She looked down at the book. The page had filled itself in. You are the voice now. Speak. And it will remain forgotten. The lights faded. The altar sealed. Darren was gone. Marcus was gone. Only the book remained. And Evelyn. Alone. Above her, the trees whispered her name. And she knew. The ritual was complete. But the next had already begun. Chapter 12, Nightmares Awake. Evelyn awoke on the forest floor. It was morning. Bright. Warm. Birds chirped overhead, and golden beams of sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft, dancing patterns. The clearing looked normal. No altar. No stone circle. No torches. Only trees. Her backpack rested beside her, untouched. The book lay open in her lap. Every page was blank. As if nothing had happened. But she remembered everything. Marcus's transformation. Darren's scream, swallowed by the roots. The woman in bark. The altar breathing beneath her feet. She stood slowly. Her limbs were sore. Her throat dry. The forest was silent, not like before, not suffocating, but expectant. As though it was waiting for something. She walked. The trail reappeared as soon as she decided to leave. It guided her out like a parent walking a child to the door. When she finally reached the edge of Blackthorn Woods, she turned back. The trees had closed behind her. No sign of a path. No sign she'd ever been there. But she knew. The forest had passed through her now. Back in Eldermoor, no one asked where she had been. The motel staff greeted her like she'd never left. Her room key still worked. The Jeep still sat in the parking lot, clean and full of gas. But her phone was dead. Not out of battery, just lifeless. When she powered it on later that night, every photo from the trip was gone. Her call logs were blank. Her voicemail contained only one message. You remember. That is enough. She checked the local news. No reports of missing persons. No search parties. No mention of Taylor, Darren, or Marcus. They had been erased. But not forgotten. Because Evelyn couldn't forget. She saw them every time she closed her eyes, Taylor reaching out as the roots dragged him down. Darren's muffled screams. Marcus, whispering in tongues, his skin splitting as the whisperer filled him. At night, she dreamed. Not ordinary dreams, memories. Not hers. She saw through the eyes of long-dead villagers, performing rituals by torchlight. Felt the trembling of children offered to the forest. Wrote in journals in unfamiliar hands. Screamed prayers to gods that wore no face. And every time she woke, the book had more writing in it. Even though she had burned it. Even though she had left it behind in the woods. It always returned. Sometimes she'd find it on her pillow. Other times, in the sink. Once, tucked into the trunk of her car. The latest entry appeared just 3 days after she left Eldermoor. The roots are spreading. You are the seed now. The nightmares grew worse. Waking dreams, too. She'd catch glimpses of things that shouldn't exist, trees growing from pavement cracks overnight, shadows in mirrors blinking independently of her reflection, whispers through the vent in hotel bathrooms. Worst of all were the faces. Faces she didn't recognize, but somehow remembered. Distorted by moss and rot. Pale, eyeless, mouths frozen in mid-screen. Always watching. Always whispering. She traveled, coast to coast. Kept moving. Never stayed more than 2 nights in the same place. But the forest followed. Not the physical forest. The memory of it. One morning, she woke in a hotel in New Mexico to find pine needles on her pillow. Another night in Maine, she watched as her reflection smiled without her. And once, in a diner in Nebraska, the waitress leaned in and whispered, "You smell like old dirt and secrets." Evelyn left immediately. She realized it then. She wasn't escaping. She was infected. Not in the biological sense, but mentally, spiritually. The whisperer had no borders. It was no longer bound to Blackthorn Woods. It lived in her. In Los Angeles, she visited a university library under an alias and dug through forbidden folklore archives. She found references to the whisperer under different names. The memory tree, the faceless root, the soil god, the witness below. Every century, it emerged. Every time, it demanded a memory bearer. Someone to hold its truth, lest it break free and feed openly. Some bearers went mad. Some disappeared. Some became cult leaders, creating entire followings to spread the memory before passing it on. She found Caleb Monroe's name in a forgotten book registry. A handwritten journal, donated anonymously. It had been marked as fiction. She laughed out loud in the reading room. That night, Evelyn stood on a beach in Oregon and burned the book again. This time, she watched until every page turned to ash. The next morning, it was waiting in her motel shower. Open to a new page. The spiral had grown. It covered the entire spread, black, jagged, pulsing. And in the center? It's time to plant again. She understood the truth then. The forest didn't need trees. It needed stories. It grew in the telling, in the remembering, in those who passed it on. And now, the memory had reached its boiling point. Her dreams had become a map, a guide to something larger. She knew where she had to go next. Where the real altar was buried. Not the one beneath Thorn's Hollow, but the first one. The origin. Where the whisperer was born. Where no bearer had ever returned from. She packed her things, turned off her phone, and left a note in the motel drawer for whoever would find it. If you're reading this, the forest chose you. Find me. Or bury the memory before it spreads. Chapter 13. The Betrayal. Evelyn's journey took her to a place that didn't exist on any map. A space whispered of only in scraps of dream and hallucination. Through pages that bled when read. Through voices murmured by rivers and winds that never blew. It was called Grave Hollow. Not a town. Not a location. A boundary. A scar. Where the first altar had been planted, centuries before Elder Moore, before Blackthorn, before the stories were words. Evelyn followed instinct. Nightmares. The pull of the book, which never left her now. She no longer carried it, it appeared when it wanted to. At the foot of her bed, inside gas station stalls, between pages of borrowed books. Always growing. Always watching. She arrived in a dying mountain town, forgotten by time and swallowed in fog. Population signs were blank. The air was thin. Trees bent toward her car as if welcoming her home. The motel clerk didn't ask her name. He handed her a key with a spiral drawn in marker on the tag. Room 3. The same number page had scrawled in the margins of her journal before disappearing. That night, Evelyn dreamt of roots breaking through her skin. She awoke with her sheet soaked in black sap. And standing at the foot of her bed was Caleb. Or something wearing his face. Same eyes. Same tired sadness. But twisted, off-center. His skin was too pale. His limbs too long. He smiled. You've carried it well. Evelyn leapt from the bed, scrambling for the book, but it was gone. Caleb tilted his head. Still pretending you're the first. What are you? She whispered. I was like you, he said. Once. He walked slowly across the room, each footstep sounding like wood cracking under frost. I bore the memory. I paid the price. And then I realized. He stopped inches from her face. Why forget, when you can rule? Evelyn's breath caught. You kept it. He smiled wider. I gave it roots. They sat across from each other as the sun began to rise, Caleb, the first awakened bearer, and Evelyn, the newest. He told her everything. How he had escaped the altar. How he had wandered until the memories no longer hurt, but comforted. How he'd learned to plant them in others. A phrase here. A book there. A nightmare sewn into a child's bedtime story. The whisperer doesn't want silence, Caleb said. It wants growth. To be remembered. Spoken. Shared. Like a virus made of truth. Evelyn's voice trembled. You betrayed the world. I gave it purpose. He stood. It's time to pass it on. He walked toward the window, light bleeding in around him. Behind him, Evelyn grabbed the coffee pot and smashed it across his back. He didn't flinch. He turned, his face unchanging. It's in you now. Violence won't change that. I'm not like you, she hissed. He raised a hand. The walls of the motel room peeled back. Not collapsed, peeled. Like bark from a tree. Beyond them, the altar. Not stone. Bone. An entire mountain formed from the remains of bearers who had failed. The wind howled with whispers, names, memories, stories. Thousands. She could feel them behind her eyes. Screaming to be told. Caleb stepped toward her, arms wide. Join me. Keep it alive. Be the next root. Evelyn backed up. But the room was gone. She stood now at the edge of the mountain. The altar pulsed like a wound beneath her feet. In her hand, the book had returned. A new page written in fresh, wet ink. 2 can carry, but only 1 may plant. She looked at Caleb. He smiled. Only now his mouth split too wide, unhinged, teeth spiraling down his throat. She understood. There had never been 2 bearers at once. Only a choice. Either she passed it to him, or he would take it. Chapter 14, The Curse Explained. The air thinned as Evelyn stood at the summit of the bone altar, the weight of the book like a stone in her hand. Around her, the wind screamed, not with gusts, but with voices, every one of them echoing through time. Bearers. Victims. Witnesses. She heard Simon. Paige. Lucas. She heard herself. And she heard the forest's first whisper. A sound not made by lungs or mouth but by roots splitting stone deep beneath the earth. Across from her, Caleb waited patiently, the shape of a man only loosely holding together. His skin seemed stretched too tight, and his fingers ended in bark. His shadow twitched in ways that didn't match his movements. You don't understand, he said softly, stepping closer. The whisperer doesn't just feed on fear. It feeds on remembrance. Every time someone forgets, it dies a little. Evelyn shook her head. You let it grow. I let it live, he said. Behind him, the altar pulsed. The mountain of bone beneath them trembled, just slightly. I saw its beginning, Caleb continued, voice nearly reverent. In my dreams. Before men spoke words, before forests had names, it was there. Beneath the dirt. Watching. Waiting. Not a god. Not a demon. Something older. A memory so ancient, it had to bury itself to survive. And now it's using us, Evelyn said bitterly. To tell its story. He nodded. Because to be forgotten is death. You know this. You felt it. He pointed to her arms. She looked down. Spirals had appeared there. Drawn not in ink, but in skin, wounds in perfect curves. She hadn't noticed. She hadn't felt them form. The more you carry it, Caleb said, the more it becomes you. She looked at the book in her hands. It no longer looked bound. It looked rooted. Alive. Like something growing from her palms. She wanted to scream. Instead, she asked, "Where did it come from?" Caleb's smile faded. He stepped to the edge of the altar and knelt. Once, there was a tribe. Pre-language. They lived in the forest, spoke with gestures and carvings. No lies. No secrets. Only stories passed through dreams. He closed his eyes. One day, a child was born who remembered things before he was born. He could whisper stories no one had told. He described places that didn't exist yet. They feared him. Thought him cursed. Evelyn felt her breath shorten. They buried him. Alive. Beneath the heart of the forest. And for the first time, the tribe kept a secret. A gust of wind rose from below. The altar cracked. The whisperer was born from that silence, Caleb said. From the death of an untold story. That's all it is. A memory that refuses to die. The altar behind him split open. A shape crawled out. Not a creature. A memory with a body. Tall. Wrapped in roots and bone. Its face split open like a peeled fruit, revealing nothing beneath. Just spirals. Whispers. A void in the shape of language. Evelyn dropped to her knees. The voices rushed her. We were the first. We gave it a name. You are the final root. Caleb turned to the whisperer and bowed. I brought her. The next bearer. But the whisperer did not move. It looked at Evelyn, not with eyes, but with remembrance. And Evelyn understood. It didn't want another Caleb. It wanted something new. Someone who would tell the truth, not keep it hidden. Someone who would break the cycle, not perpetuate it. And suddenly she knew why the forest had chosen her. Not to continue the curse, but to end it. She stood. Caleb rose with her, eyes wide. What are you doing? He hissed. Evelyn raised the book. And she began to speak. Out loud. Every name the book had ever written. Every story it had ever buried. Every memory the forest tried to swallow. She spoke of Lucas, screaming into the roots. Of Darren, dragged into the altar. Of Simon's stitched mouth. Of Paige's madness. Of Caleb, who let the rot take root. She told the truth. And the whisperer screamed. Its form shook. Its body cracked. The spirals on Evelyn's arms uncoiled, glowing bright red, then burned away. Caleb lunged at her, fury on his face. You'll kill it. You'll kill me. She didn't stop. She spoke until her throat bled. The altar cracked completely, spilling light from within. Not flame. Memory. It poured from the mountain, rushing over her like a river, consuming her with visions. Pain. Love. Secrets. Sacrifices. Thousands of lives. And then, silence. When Evelyn awoke, she was alone. The altar was gone. The mountain was ash. The forest stood still, no longer whispering. At her feet lay the book. Blank. Lifeless. She picked it up. On the first page, a final sentence had written itself. You remembered. So we do not have to. She looked to the horizon. The tree stood straight. No faces. No shadows. The whisperer was gone. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt nothing watching. She had ended the story. She had spoken its name. And now, she was free. Chapter 15, Hunted. 6 months later. Evelyn lived quietly in a coastal town where no trees grew within a mile of the shore. She didn't keep plants. She slept with the windows open, never drew the curtains, and avoided mirrors after sunset. Her apartment was sparse, just a bed, a chair, and a single notebook she never opened. The book had not returned. The whispers had stopped. The scars on her arms were gone. It was over. Or so she thought. Until the morning she found the spiral etched into her doorframe. Small. Carved deep. Still fresh. Her heart stopped. She stood frozen for nearly 5 minutes, unable to breathe. No wind. No birds. No footsteps. Just that mark. And she knew someone else remembered. Later that day, she walked to the town library and used the public terminal to search Blackthorn Woods. Nothing. No entries. No search results. Not even cached pages. It was as if the entire forest had been wiped from the internet. That night, she stayed in a motel. But it didn't matter. At 3:14 a.m., she woke to find the spiral carved into her bedside lamp. She turned on the light. It didn't work. The bulb had been filled with pine needles. By the 4th day, Evelyn had stopped sleeping. She started hearing footsteps behind her on empty streets. Saw silhouettes in the reflection of coffee shop windows. Someone followed her home one night. She walked faster. So did they. When she turned to confront them, no one was there. But a folded piece of paper lay on the ground. She picked it up. In red ink. You ended the forest. But you forgot the roots. They called themselves the Hollowed. A remnant. A cult. Those who had worshipped the Whisperer before language, before sacrifice, before the first altar. When the forest fell silent, they felt it. And they were angry. Because Evelyn hadn't just ended the cycle, she had broken the contract. The Whisperer hadn't died. It had starved. And they wanted to bring it back. Through her. Evelyn fled again. This time to the Midwest. Wide skies. Flat earth. Fields, not forests. But it didn't matter. Wherever she went, the signs followed. Spirals carved into the bathroom stall. A customer at a diner smiling too wide. Children humming a tune she'd heard once, in a dream, as Lucas burned beside the altar. And then, the whispers returned. Not the whisperers. Human voices. Chanting. Soft. In the walls. They were hunting her. Not to kill her. But to bleed her. The Hollowed believed if they could spill the blood of the final bearer upon the remains of the altar, the forest would rise again. And in its wake, the old ways would return. So she ran. Changed names. Burned her fingerprints with acid. Cut off her hair. Stopped speaking for weeks at a time. Until, one day, she received a letter. No envelope. Just a page. Her name written at the top. Below it. Come home. Or we'll bring the forest to you. Attached was a photo. Of her mother. Bound to a tree. Eyes sewn shut. She didn't hesitate. Evelyn packed a bag and headed east. Back to the scar. To what remained of Blackthorn Woods. Only now it was different. The trees had returned. But not in the same place. They were growing along highways, up through cracks in city sidewalks, curling along power lines like vines. The forest wasn't coming back. It already had. She reached Eldermore just past midnight. The town was abandoned. No lights. No cars. No people. Only spirals. Drawn in ash across the roads. Etched into windows. Spun into the very shape of the streets. The Hollowed had turned the town into a living sigil. At its center, the stump of the old altar. Now rebuilt. Stronger. Wider. Hung with offerings, teeth, bones, photographs of the lost. And standing at its base were 5 figures. Hooded. Waiting. One of them wore bark over his face. Another held a book, not the original, but a copy, sewn from stolen memories and soaked in lies. They turned to Evelyn as she stepped into the clearing. One figure removed their hood. A woman. Young. Eyes sharp. Face familiar. "Do you know me?" she asked. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "No." The woman smiled. "You should. You made me. Every story you ever buried fed us." She stepped forward. "I'm not the forest. I'm what you left behind." She held out a knife. "Come willingly. Bleed willingly. And we can finish what you started." Evelyn looked at the altar. The roots beneath it moved. The whisperer was still hungry. But so was she. Because Evelyn hadn't run all this way out of fear. She had come back to kill it for good. And this time, she wouldn't speak. She'd let the silence do the work. Chapter 16, Echoes of the Past. Evelyn stood before the altar, the knife still offered to her by the hooded woman. Around them, the other hollowed disciples began to chant, low, rhythmic, almost mournful. The altar pulsed in response, and the roots beneath it writhed like something deep underground was beginning to stir. The forest had returned to Eldamur, yes. But it hadn't returned naturally. It had been summoned. Evelyn's eyes locked on the woman's. "I'm not bleeding for it," she said coldly. The woman tilted her head. "You already have. The forest remembers every cut. Every scream. Every secret you ever tried to bury." She turned to the altar and placed the knife on its cracked surface. "We don't need your permission. Just your body." With that, the hollowed surged forward. Evelyn ran. Not out of fear. Out of strategy. Because she knew something they didn't. The altar wasn't the heart of the forest anymore. It was a mouth. And like all mouths, it needed to be fed wrong to choke. She sprinted through the fog-drenched ruins of Eldamur, weaving past spiral-marked buildings, dead street lamps, and trees split open like wounds. The street seemed to bend with her steps, guiding her, not trapping her. She realized the forest still recognized her. It hadn't chosen the hollowed. It had chosen her. And it had left her one final door. She reached the site of the old post office, now nothing more than a husk of cracked brick and vines. The mailbox was still standing, impossibly untouched. Inside, a key. She took it. Ran 2 more blocks. And found the place the dreams had always led her to. The cellar of the old church. Its door was spiral carved. Locked with 3 rusted chains. Evelyn inserted the key. The chain snapped like paper. She descended. The staircase went deeper than physics should allow. Stone gave way to roots. Roots gave way to bone. Each step downward echoed with voices, not whispers, but full conversations. Arguments. Cries. Pleading. It was as if all the bearers who came before were trapped here, looping their final thoughts endlessly. It was supposed to end with me. I tried to bury it. It bloomed anyway. We should have burned the boy instead. Evelyn kept walking. The stairwell finally opened into a chamber. Massive. Underground. Ancient. And at its center, the seed. It pulsed with wet light, encased in a cocoon of amber and root. It looked like a heart, beating slowly. And inside, something moved. Not alive. Not dead. An echo of the whisperer. Not reborn, not gone. Dormant. A remnant of the memory. Caleb had never found this. The hollowed had never reached it. Only Evelyn had been allowed in. Because only she had spoken the memory aloud. Only she had ended the cycle once. And now, she had a choice. Destroy it forever. Or plant it again. The voices rose behind her. The hollowed had followed. The woman stepped into the chamber, the others behind her, gasping at the seed's glow. "I knew you would lead us here," she whispered. She turned to her disciples. She's done her part. Finish it. They advanced. Evelyn stepped in front of the seed, blocking them. I know what happens if this grows again, she said. I know what it becomes. The woman grinned. We do too. She raised a blade. Step aside. But Evelyn wasn't afraid. Because she had seen something else in the seed. A memory no one else had reached. A final name etched into the core. One even the whisperer had hidden. Her own. She had never just been a bearer. She was the first child. The one from the story Caleb told. The tribe that had buried the boy alive, it hadn't worked. The spirit hadn't been silenced. It had been passed into blood. Into a lineage that wandered for generations. Until one day, that blood wandered back home. To her. The moment Evelyn accepted that truth, the seed responded. It opened. Light burst out, searing the chamber. The hollowed screamed, falling to the floor as their voices were ripped from their throats, pulled into the light. The woman dropped her knife. Evelyn stepped forward. She touched the heart of the seed. And whispered one word. End. There was no explosion. No fire. Just silence. Pure. Total. The seed collapsed into dust. The voices stopped. The forest above withered instantly. Trees crumbling, branches cracking, the altar splitting apart and sinking into the earth. The hollowed were left empty. No power. No memory. Only forgetfulness. The woman staggered backward, staring at Evelyn with horror. What have you done? Evelyn turned to her. I gave it what it feared most. The woman blinked. What? Evelyn walked past her, up the stairs. I forgot it. The world moved on. No more spirals. No more whispers. No more forests with eyes. Eldermore was reclaimed by moss and time, its ruins swallowed into the soil. And Evelyn? She lived a quiet life. With no dreams. And no memory of why she sometimes woke up crying. Because even she had forgotten. Exactly as she'd planned. Chapter 17, The Lake of Sorrows. It started, as it always did, with a ripple. Far from Eldermore, in a sleepy township nestled between fog-drenched hills, a lake began to breathe. Silvermere Lake had always been a mystery. No one remembered it being dug, and it didn't feed from any river. It just was. Locals claimed it was bottomless. That you could scream into the water and never hear an echo. Most stayed away. But not Joan Weller, a freelance geologist with a passion for abandoned maps and terrain that didn't quite make sense. She was drawn to anomalies, and Silvermere was a perfect anomaly. She arrived with a backpack, a drone, and a journal full of scribbled coordinates. The lake reflected nothing. Not the sky. Not her face. Not even the sun. She tossed a stone in. No splash. Just ripples, silent, endless, spiraling outward, then inward, like the lake was pulling itself in. She crouched and touched the surface. And in that moment, the nightmares began again. That night, Joan dreamt of a forest made of bone. Of trees shaped like screaming mouths. Of a woman standing on an altar made of stitched skin, whispering to something underground. In the dream, she walked closer and looked up at the woman. It was herself. When she awoke, the spiral was carved into her wrist. She went back to Silvermere every day after that. She couldn't help it. The lake pulled at her. She began sketching spirals in the dirt without realizing. Whispering names she didn't know. Caleb. Paige. Lucas. Evelyn. She found herself muttering them into the water, watching the ripples change. Soon, the lake began to answer. First with dreams. Then with voices. And finally, with a book. She found it on the shore, dry despite the mist. Bound in pale leather. Its cover blank. But when she opened it, names, dates, drawings, maps, pages that described a forest that didn't exist anymore, pages that spoke of a thing called the Whisperer, pages that shouldn't have survived. She brought it home, read it obsessively, and as she read, she forgot more and more about her own life. Her friends stopped hearing from her. Her notes grew erratic. Her home filled with carvings. And one night, standing at the lake with the book in hand, she whispered, "Come back." And the lake responded. A single bubble rose to the surface. Then another. Then dozens. The water trembled. The ripples reversed. The book in her hand glowed, its pages flipping madly. And from the depths, something stirred. Not the Whisperer. No. It had been forgotten. But not erased. What came now was older. Purer. Not a spirit. Not a memory. A seed. The same that Evelyn had once destroyed, only now, reborn from the blood, the soil, the silence. Because stories never truly die. They just wait. That night, Joan was found walking naked along the lake's edge. Her eyes were gone. Her mouth was sewn shut with reed fibers. And yet she smiled. Because she wasn't Joan anymore. She was the next voice. And the lake? It was no longer Silvermere. Its name had returned. Lake of Sorrows. And it whispered, even when the wind was still. Especially when the wind was still. Chapter 18. The Madness Spreads. They came from all over. Not by invitation. Not by call. But drawn, slowly, surely, to Silvermere. Or what was once Silvermere. Now, locals called it the Lake of Sorrows, without knowing why. Without realizing the name had returned to them like a forgotten scar finally aching in bad weather. They came in vans, on foot, through overgrown trails and forgotten paths. No social media. No flyers. No online community. Just a pull. A dream. A whisper. And at the center of it all was Joan. Though she no longer used that name. To her followers, she was simply the voice beneath. She wore white robes sewn from tent fabric and reeds. Her eyes remained closed, healed shut by time or will, but she saw perfectly. Her mouth had never been unstitched. She spoke in gestures, in tilts of the head, in the scrape of her fingers on the pages of the book she always carried. The new memory. The book Evelyn had destroyed. But not completely. Because a memory is never gone if someone remembers it. And Joan remembered perfectly. The people who gathered at the lake were broken in ways they couldn't explain. One man had not slept in 17 days, afraid his dreams would speak back. A woman arrived after waking up to find her walls covered in charcoal drawings of trees with teeth. A teenager came after carving spirals into his own palms without knowing what they meant. They didn't ask questions. They knelt. Joan led them through rituals, silent ones. No chants. No fire. Only touch. Memory passed hand to hand. And each time, a little more of the old forest seeped back into the world. The ground near the lake began to shift. Trees sprouted in hours, not years. Animals appeared with missing eyes and mouths that opened sideways. Insects swarmed in perfect spirals. And beneath the water, something bloomed. Not a shape. A presence. A consciousness. One that remembered what it was to be feared. What it was to be carried. And it wanted to walk again. Meanwhile, Evelyn felt it. Thousands of miles away, she woke one night to find blood running from her nose. The walls of her apartment had warped slightly, leaning inward, like they wanted to hear her breathe. She stood and looked in the mirror. There, carved just under her collarbone, were the words, "It grows again." She screamed for the first time in years. Not out of fear, but fury. Because she knew now. Killing the Whisperer wasn't enough. Silence was a seed. And someone, Joan, had planted it again. Back at the lake, the rituals deepened. The hollowed had returned, not all, not as they were, but in fragments. Scattered believers. Wanderers who'd lost their gods. They saw Joan and knew. She was not a bearer. She was soil. And they worshipped her. On the 23rd day, a child emerged from the water. Alone. Naked. Unblinking. It didn't cry. Didn't speak. It simply knelt before Joan and placed a small, wet seed into her palm. A spiral was carved into its chest. It smiled. Joan nodded. Then turned to her people. And for the first time, spoke aloud, without unsealing her lips. A voice that came from inside them all. We do not remember the forest. We become it. Chapter 19, The Sacrifice. The day Evelyn returned to the world, it was already rotting. Cities were fine. Roads intact. People smiling. But beneath it all, beneath sidewalks and screen light, asphalt and algorithm, the memory stirred. She saw it in reflections. In spirals carved into playground bark. In children speaking languages they had no business knowing, dead tongues that cracked through baby teeth like splinters. Joan had done more than revive the memory. She had changed its form. No longer a whisper in the trees. Now it lived in the water, the soil, the people. A viral memory. And Evelyn knew the truth, she hadn't killed the whisperer. She had only released it from its shape. She traveled alone. No followers. No map. But she knew where to go. The dreams returned, not hers anymore, but Joan's. She saw them through her eyes. The lake. The child. The ceremonies. The gathering. And the seed. Joan had kept it alive. She hadn't planted it in the forest this time. She had planted it in herself. The seed beat inside her like a second heart. Evelyn reached the lake under moonlight. Silvermere, no, the lake of sorrows, had changed. The water churned with colourless foam. Roots rose from its banks like grasping arms. The trees surrounding it were unnaturally tall and pale, their bark split to reveal wet pulp that pulsed with slow, wet breaths. In the centre of the shore, Joan waited. Still robed. Still blind. Surrounded by dozens of followers kneeling in a perfect spiral, all humming the same low, guttural note. A child stood beside her. Not born. Not raised. Grown. It had no eyes. Its teeth were wooden. Its skin translucent and full of moving things. Joan raised her arms. The humming stopped. You came to witness, Joan said. Her lips never moved. The voice bled from the mouths of the followers in unison. I came to end it, Evelyn replied. You already did, Joan said. And look what bloomed from the ash. She stepped aside. Behind her, the ground split. And from the soil rose the new altar. It wasn't made of stone. It was her. Evelyn stared in horror. It was her own body, petrified and bent backward in a grotesque arc, hair grown into moss, spiral-shaped eyes locked in a look of eternal warning. A totem. A fossil. A forgotten version of herself. Joan smiled. The forest never forgets its children. The crowd chanted. The child stepped forward and placed the seed in the altar's hollow chest. The ground shook. The sky split. A sound like a scream too old to be heard rippled across the lake. And Evelyn knew, if the seed bloomed here, it would never be stopped again. This would be the final planting. She ran toward the altar. The followers rose. They did not fight. They bled. Each touched their own chest, whispered their names, and exploded into memory, not gore, not flesh, but stories, erupting like smoke and language into the sky. Evelyn was knocked back. She crawled toward the altar, her skin peeling from her hands, her eyes burning with forgotten names. "You cannot unplant what you are," Joan whispered behind her. Evelyn reached the child. It smiled and handed her the book. The final version. Unwritten. Waiting. Inside was only one sentence. "One must remember, or all will." She understood. There was one choice left. She couldn't destroy the seed, but she could contain it. Bury it where it had always tried to live. Inside her. She grabbed the seed and swallowed it whole. The altar screamed. Joan screamed. The child wept black sap and collapsed. The lake boiled. And Evelyn? She burned from the inside out. Every memory. Every scream. Every bearer. Every whisper. She took it all and locked it behind her eyes. When the sun rose, the lake was calm again. Joan was gone. So were the trees. The altar had crumbled to dust. And Evelyn lay at the shore. Alive. Barely. The book beside her. Still blank. But now, she couldn't speak. Not a word. Her mouth had sealed shut, not with thread, but by choice. Because she now held the memory. Alone. Forever. The world was safe. But only as long as she remained silent. Only as long as she remembered. Only as long as no one else listened. Chapter 20, The Beast Within. Evelyn no longer spoke. Not because she couldn't. Because she mustn't. The seal that kept the whisperer locked inside her, sealed with silence, with sacrifice, depended on a single law. If she tells the story, the forest returns. So she said nothing. Not when strangers asked if she was okay. Not when doctors tried to examine her. Not when nightmares clawed their way into her waking hours. She kept her lips closed, even when they bled. Even when the voice inside her begged to be let out. At first, it was manageable. The memory slept in brief intervals, like a newborn. Restless. Squirming. Testing its boundaries. But soon, it began to wake more often. Not fully. Just enough. Enough to leave her with gaps. Lost hours, missing time, dreams that bled into reality. She'd wake up in strange places. Covered in dirt. Mud. Blood. One morning, she found herself crouched in a field, growling. Naked. Mouth full of pine needles. Another, she awoke surrounded by people, 6 of them, arranged in a spiral, kneeling, smiling, whispering her name. She didn't know who they were. They were gone when she blinked. But she knew the pattern. The forest was taking root again. Inside her. She moved into a remote cabin near the edge of a frozen lake, far from people, far from language. She burned the mirrors. Etched warnings into the walls. Chained herself to the bed each night. And still, it spoke. Not in English. Not in words. But in remembering. Every breath she took, the memory twisted. Replayed. Warped. Sometimes she was Evelyn. Sometimes she was Joan. Sometimes she was the child in the seed. Sometimes, horrifyingly, she was Caleb, smiling through bark and rot as the forest bled from his mouth. It all blurred. Names became noise. Time bent. And then, she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard since the day she sealed the whisperer. Laughter. Faint. Inside her skull. A child's giggle layered with a scream. Then. You held me well. But not long enough. That night, she woke to find the chains broken. Her hand stained black. The book, blank for so long, had one page filled. A sketch. Of her face. Mouth open. Something crawling out of it. The caption beneath. The soil has cracked. The beast within blooms. She fled the next day. She didn't pack. Didn't clean. Didn't close the door. She simply ran. Back to the lake. The altar ruins. The dead trees. And she screamed, not out loud, but internally, calling out to whatever remnants were left. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to stop it. The lake did not answer. But the ground shifted. A hand emerged. Her own. Another version of herself. Pale. Empty-eyed. Mouth stitched. It pointed to the sky. And above her, the clouds twisted into a spiral. The forest wasn't in her anymore. It had bled back into the world. Through her. She had not sealed it. She had only delayed it. And now the memory had remembered itself. No bearer. No seed. Just story, drifting freely like spores, infecting the wind. She dropped to her knees. Cried. For the first time in years, she opened her mouth. And whispered. I'm sorry. The spiral lit up in the sky. And in that moment, somewhere, someone heard her. A child. A stranger. A sleeper. And they would remember. And they would grow it. And the cycle would begin again. Unless... She ended it at the root. At herself. Chapter 21, Faces of the Dead. The snow fell in spirals that night. Not in flakes. Not in drifts. Spirals, perfect, delicate, and impossible, falling in slow, whispering arcs as Evelyn trudged through the ruined remains of the forest. Each step was heavier than the last. Each breath colder than bone. She had followed the voices, not a trail. And the voices had led her back. To a place that no longer existed, except in memory. The circle of witnesses. It was not marked on any map. But it had always been there. A depression in the earth surrounded by leaning trees, all blackened and dead, yet somehow still growing downward, roots coiled like intestines, feeding off something buried. And in the center, 13 totems. Human-sized. Each carved from wood too dark for oak and too wet for pine. Each a perfect likeness of a face Evelyn knew. Lucas. Simon. Paige. Caleb. Joan. Even herself. All of them. Staring. Not accusing. Not forgiving. Just present. The past had gathered. And it wanted her to speak. The moment she stepped into the circle, the totems breathed. The air turned thick and hot, the snow melting into steam. Wind circled her. Roots rose from the ground like fingers, encasing her ankles. She couldn't run. She couldn't turn. And she didn't want to. Because she had come here for truth. Even if it destroyed her. The Lucas totem opened its mouth first. Its wooden lips cracked as it spoke. You let me die for silence. You let me burn in that place for a story you couldn't carry. She dropped to her knees. I tried. I tried to hold it. The page totem turned. Her face was split by spiral scars. You planted it in me, even when you thought you were saving me. You made me a root. Evelyn sobbed. I didn't know. You never asked. The Joan totem was next. I took the memory and made it bloom. Because you didn't bury it deep enough. Evelyn stood now. Tears freezing on her cheeks. Then what should I have done? Listened. Dug deeper. Killed the root, not the branch. The Simon totem creaked. There is no end unless you go to the first face. The one the forest never let speak. Evelyn frowned. The first bearer. The Caleb totem moved. Its eyes opened, wet and human and alive. No. The boy they buried alive. The child. The beginning. Not the whisperer. But the one who created it. By remembering too much. by seeing too far, by being feared for knowing things no child should. Evelyn whispered, "He's still down there." The ground split beneath her. Not violently. Just enough. A spiral staircase revealed itself, carved from petrified root and memory, pulsing gently. The totems all turned toward it. And the message was clear. She must descend. Not to carry the memory. Not to pass it on. But to find its beginning. And unmake it. Even if it meant tearing out her own mind. She stepped onto the first stair. The wind silenced. The totems bowed. And the forest waited. Chapter 22, Secrets of the Cabin. The staircase spiraled downward in absolute silence. Not the kind of silence that invited calm, but a total absence of sound. No wind. No breath. Not even the faint scuff of Evelyn's boots on the steps. It was as if the air itself refused to acknowledge she existed. Each step was carved from a different type of wood, but none from trees that should grow in this world. Grain like veins, bark that glistened like skin. She didn't count them. She couldn't. Time ceased the further she went. Her thoughts unraveled. Her memories blinked in and out. 1 second she was 28. The next, 7, barefoot in her mother's kitchen. Then 83, watching someone else's funeral. Time wasn't a direction here. It was a circle, spinning beneath her skull. And at the bottom, a door. Familiar. Cabin wood. Rotting. Warped. With a rusted handle. Exactly like the one she'd first opened 3 years ago in Blackthorn. But this wasn't the same place. This wasn't a location. It was a memory made real. She reached out. Touched the knob. The door opened. And Evelyn stepped into the first cabin. The room smelled of wet leaves and long dead breath. Inside were no windows. Just a hearth filled with cold ash and a chair carved from bone and moss. Dust motes drifted through the air in slow spirals, suspended like they feared landing. And in the center of the room, a crib. Ancient. Covered in bark. Its base rooted into the floor. Evelyn approached. She didn't want to look. But she had to. She leaned over. And saw the boy. Small. Frail. Pale as wax. Eyes wide open. Black. Empty. No mouth. Just a spiral carved into his face, where lips should be. He blinked once. And suddenly, Evelyn was inside his mind. She saw through his eyes. Centuries ago. A tribe kneeling in fear. Not of gods. But of him. Because he spoke truths no one should know. Told stories before they happened. Described people he had never seen. He was too young to lie. Too old to forget. So they silenced him. Not with rope or gag. But with ritual. They carved the spiral. Tore out his voice. Buried him beneath the trees. And their shame? Became the memory. Their fear fed it. Their guilt shaped it. And when he died, the silence didn't die with him. It became the whisperer. Evelyn stumbled back. Sobbing. Because she understood now. The whisperer wasn't a monster. It was a cry that had never been heard. A scream trapped in dirt. Begging someone, anyone, to remember the boy. Not as a beast. But as a child. The cabin trembled. The crib split. The boy sat up. Eyes leaking sap. He raised his hand. Pointed to her. Then to his chest. Then to the door. She nodded. "I'll carry you." And as she said it, his face vanished. His body crumbled into roots. The spiral in the air uncoiled. For the first time in centuries, the silence was gone. The memory had been spoken. The truth had been heard. Evelyn turned, walked back up the stairs, and when she emerged, the totems were gone. The forest was still. No spirals. No whispers. No wind. Just peace. Real peace. She held no book. No visions. No power. Just a story. And for the first time, she could finally say, "It's over." Chapter 23, The Escape Plan. Evelyn had not spoken the story aloud to another person. Not yet. But now that the truth had been unearthed, not conjured, not imagined, but understood, something in the world shifted. The whisperer was gone. But its echoes were not. Because memory doesn't disappear. It decays. And even decay has its scent. She first felt it on the wind, warm and stale, like breath exhaled from the mouth of the forest. Then she heard the cries. Not from ghosts. Not from demons. From people. Still trapped. Still running. Still stuck in loops crafted by the whisperer's dying influence. Like insects inside an abandoned web, waiting for a spider that would never return. They were survivors, fragments of minds caught between dream and truth, folded into the cracks of Blackthorn, Silvermere, Grave Hollow. Still hearing the whispers. Still living in stories they didn't know had ended. Evelyn couldn't let them rot there. She had to bring them home. The plan was simple. Not in design. In purpose. She would retrace the story in reverse. Step by step. Chapter by chapter. Tear down every remnant the whisperer left behind. She packed nothing. Took only her notebook, now full. Not with spirals, but instructions. Hand-drawn maps. Memories she could weaponize. Truth sharp enough to cut through illusions. She wasn't just Evelyn anymore. She was the last voice. The final witness. The one who had seen the first scream, and who now bore the final breath. Her first stop was what remained of the lake. Not Silvermere. Not the Lake of Sorrows. Just water now. Cold, still, and innocent. But beneath it, Joan. Still alive. Still whispering. Evelyn stood on the shore and waited. A day passed. Then two. And on the third, Joan emerged. Eyes wide. Mouth stitched again by her own hand. Her followers, what few remained, were broken, vacant, lost in rewound prayers that no longer meant anything. Evelyn did not speak. She only opened the notebook. On the page, a drawing of the first boy. Not a symbol. A face. Joan collapsed the moment she saw it. And for the first time in her life, she cried. No black sap. Just tears. And silence. She had been freed. Next, Evelyn walked to Eldermore. Through fog and frost and fields abandoned by time. She reached the crumbling streets and found them still alive, not the buildings, but the people. Caleb's remnants. The hollowed. They had no master now. No ritual. No altar. But they still believed. Still knelt at crumbled stones. Still whispered to the dark, hoping for a response. Evelyn gave them none. She gave them truth. Page by page, she read to them, not aloud, but with her presence. She showed them the child, the burial, the transformation. And one by one, they dropped their bark masks. They burned their robes. They wept. They remembered. And they walked away. But there was one more place. The hardest. The furthest. The most deeply buried. The false forest. A place the whisperer had never physically touched, but had imagined into being, a pocket of narrative space where victims lived entire lives without realizing they were trapped. Evelyn found it deep within a gorge. A tunnel into another reality. One not ruled by time, but structure, an unfinished chapter where people wandered endlessly. Simon was there. and Paige, and Lucas, and hundreds of others, each caught in a memory loop, each thinking the story was still happening. She had to break it. Not with fire. Not with rage. With one line. The forest is gone. The moment she said it, the world cracked. The leaves turned to ash. The air turned to wind. The illusion shattered. The people blinked. Then stared. Then collapsed into her arms. Not dead. Not ghosts. Just tired. And ready to go home. They walked for 3 days. Emerged into a world that had forgotten them. No one recognized their names. Their homes were gone. Their families aged or dead. But they were free. Not whole. Not healed. But free. Evelyn stood at the edge of the last forest, looking back one final time. Not in fear. In remembrance. And for the first time, she smiled. Because she hadn't survived. She had saved. Chapter 24. Unholy ground. Evelyn had taken the last survivors out of the dream. She had burned the stories, erased the loops, silenced the rituals. The Whisperer was dead. Its seed dissolved. Its forest gone. But there was one thing she had not faced. The original altar. Not the stone circle at Thorn's Hollow. Not the bone shrine beneath Lake of Sorrows. The first, true place. Where the unnamed child had been buried. Where memory stopped being human and became something else. The place the forest had grown from, not as roots, but as an idea. She had seen it only once. In the boy's memory. In a flash of teeth in the dirt. And now, she had to go there. Because the last whisper wasn't a voice. It was a place. The journey took her beyond maps. Beyond roads. She walked alone, following dreams more than geography. She bled 3 times from her feet. She passed forests that flinched when she neared. The world no longer recognized her as human. Even nature saw her as something else. A story on legs. By the 4th night, the sky changed. The stars blinked in spirals. Not because the Whisperer had returned, but because she had entered its origin. The scar of the first scream. The ground breathed here, and not with lungs, but with memory. It recoiled at her presence. It remembered her. She descended through a cleft in the rocks that led nowhere on any compass. A stairwell made of compacted roots. No carvings. No torches. Just stillness. She knew where she was going. To the burial stone. The true altar. The place where they had buried the boy who knew too much. Where shame had turned to silence. And silence had become a god. She emerged into a chamber that should not have existed. Whispered, "I remember you." The ground shuddered. Not in terror. In relief. And beneath the stone, she felt it. Not a scream. Not a curse. But a sigh. The spiral in the sky unraveled. The trees for miles around bent low and stilled. Every shadow flickering across the earth stopped whispering. Because now, someone had finally remembered the truth. Not the story the cults told. Not the fear Caleb had spread. Not the hunger Joan had planted. The real story. The boy. The silence. The wound. And once remembered truthfully, it could finally do what no one else had allowed it to. Rest. Evelyn stood. The slab turned to ash beneath her. And a breeze passed through the hollow. Soft. Free. For the first time in 1,000 years. No more whispers. No more watchers. No more forest. Only ground. Unholy no longer. But forgiven. Chapter 25, The Ultimate Confrontation. Evelyn left the burial stone behind, her footsteps softer now. The world didn't recoil from her anymore. The wind blew gently, no longer thick with memory. The tree stood quiet, no longer leaning to listen. The forest had become just a forest again, silent, still, and empty. But Evelyn knew the difference between silence and absence. Something deeper stirred beneath it all. The whisperer had been born of shame and buried truth. But it had not been the first. Beneath it, behind it, before it, there was something else. The thing that fed on silence. The thing that made silence holy. She had felt it only once before, in the split second before the altar's true scream had ended. A cold pressure. A darkness with no shape or face. Not memory. Not thought. Just hunger. She returned to the spiral-cleared field near Eldermore. Here, the trees no longer grew. No bird sang. The grass curled away from the center, like the land itself feared what lay below. She stepped into the middle and dug. Not with tools. With her hands. Fingernails cracking. Blood soaking the dirt. She dug until her fingers found stone. Not an altar. Not a grave. A door. A lid. Flat. Smooth. Breathing. She pressed her ear to it. Nothing. Then everything. A chorus of silence. She was not hearing it with her ears. She was remembering it. The origin. Not of the whisperer. Not of the forest. But of silence itself. And beneath that stone was the first hunger. Not a demon. Not a spirit. But a void. Older than thought. Older than pain. Older than memory. The reason stories had to be told. Because if they weren't, this thing would come to eat what had been forgotten. She sat beside the stone for hours. Trying to resist. Trying to understand. But it wanted something from her. Something more dangerous than her death. It wanted her to forget herself. To let go of everything. The stories. The truth. Her own name. Because if she forgot who she was, it would rise. Not as a shape. Not as a voice. But as the absence of all things. Her thoughts blurred. Names slipped. Faces vanished. The world lost color. She started to forget her mother's voice. Lucas's face. The feel of rain. The crackle of fire. Only one thing held on. The child. The one who had been buried. His story. His scream. That singular, pure moment of injustice. She clung to it. Whispered it. Carved it into her arm with a stone. He screamed. I heard him. And the lid beneath her froze. The hunger stilled. The void hissed, but retreated. Because even it, ancient, formless, patient, could not consume a story actively remembered. Not one that burned. Evelyn stood. Weak. Torn. But whole. She placed the stone she'd carved into the center of the lid. A single sentence. A truth older than silence. He was real. The ground healed over. Grass returned. Color bled back into the air. And the weight that had pressed on the earth for eternity finally lifted. The ultimate confrontation had not been a battle. Not a scream. Not fire. But a remembering. Because what lies beneath silence isn't evil. It's emptiness. And emptiness only wins when no one speaks. No one remembers. No one cares. But Evelyn remembered. She carried him. The child. The scream. And now she could rest. Chapter 26, The Return to Nothing. Evelyn walked through a world that no longer whispered. And it was terrifying. Not because it was haunted. Not because the trees bled. But because it was normal. Too normal. The sky stayed blue. The roads were empty of spirals. Children laughed without echo. There were no carved altars, no strange shadows watching from tree lines, no dreams that pulled your bones inside out. The horror was gone. And in its place, a profound, unbearable quiet. Not the sinister kind. The final kind. She wandered for weeks, sleeping in abandoned cabins, empty motels, rest stops with chirping televisions and blinking vacancy signs. No one recognized her. No one remembered Blackthorn, or Silvermere, or the Hollowed, or the altar buried beneath the world. It had all been erased. Cleanly. Flawlessly. Only she remained. The lone thread from a severed web. One morning, Evelyn sat on a hill just beyond a dying wheat field. The grass swayed gently. Bees drifted lazily between yellow blossoms. Nothing strange. Nothing sharp. She opened her notebook. The pages were blank. Every word she'd ever written, gone. Even the story of the boy. Even the name she'd carved into her skin. Her scar had faded too. It was as though memory itself had finally let her go. But it hadn't. She remembered. She always would. The cost of survival wasn't scars. It was solitude. Because no one could carry what she knew. No one should. She was not a witness anymore. She was a grave. And the story was buried in her. Eventually, she stopped moving. She found a town with no name, by a road that had long since lost its lines. A place of silence, but a gentle one. She bought a home. Planted a tree. Did not speak. Not out of fear. But out of respect. Because if silence had once been a god, it had now become a friend. Evelyn lived for many years. She grew older. Her hair greyed. Her hands shook. The dreams never came back. Until one day, a child wandered into her garden. A girl with twig-stuck hair and eyes too deep for her age. She asked Evelyn what the tree was. Evelyn smiled, knelt down, and whispered, "It's a memory." The girl didn't understand. She didn't need to. But when she left, she took a fallen leaf with her. And Evelyn watched as the wind carried it down the road, spiraling once, then settling flat. Not a curse. Not a prophecy. Just a fragment. Of something old. Something finished. Something true. Chapter 27, Windsown Leaves. Her name was Myra. She was only 8 when she met the quiet woman in the cottage at the end of the forgotten road. She didn't know the woman's name. Didn't ask. The woman didn't speak much, just pointed to the tall tree in the center of the garden and smiled like it held something important. Myra had reached down, picked up a single fallen leaf. Brown at the edges, spiral-veined, unlike anything she'd seen, and tucked it into her pocket. When she got home, she placed it between the pages of her notebook. And forgot about it. For a while. It began with dreams. Not nightmares. Not yet. Just quiet dreams. Of tall, pale trees that bent to listen. Of spirals drawn in water. Of a woman with grey hair humming a lullaby without sound. Myra woke from them calm. And curious. She began sketching what she saw. Not because she remembered the dreams, but because her hand moved on its own. Spirals. Trees. A cabin with one window. Her drawings unsettled her parents. They took her to doctors. The doctors saw nothing wrong. No trauma. No stress. Just imagination. But the dreams continued. And the leaf in her notebook stayed untouched. Except it was changing. At first, it browned further. Then softened. Then unfurled. One day, Myra opened her notebook and found the leaf had turned to paper. Thin, yellowed, and filled with writing in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. It said, "The forest forgets. But the roots never do." Myra blinked. She had never learned to read cursive. She didn't know what roots meant, not really. But something inside her remembered. She went back to the cottage. It was gone. Just a field of tall grass. No tree. No door. No old woman. But the wind pulled her forward. And she found a single object buried beneath the soil where the tree had once stood. A notebook. Blank. Except the last page, which read, "For the one who listens." Myra took it home. She began writing. Not stories. Not poems. Memories. One she had never lived. The child in the pit. The altar of teeth. The lake that boiled in silence. The whisper that had no mouth but lived in every voice. She didn't know where the memories came from. But she knew they had been waiting. Not to return, but to be understood. Myra never heard voices. Never carved spirals into walls. She simply wrote. And as she did, she felt the world grow lighter. Because some stories aren't meant to be told in screams or fire. Some are passed on gently. Through leaves. Through wind. Through a little girl with too much silence in her heart. Evelyn passed away that winter. Quietly. Without pain. Without fear. And though no one attended her funeral, Myra placed a single thing at her grave. The leaf. Still soft. Still spiral-veined. Still remembering. Chapter 28, The Hollow Horizon. Myra was 16 when she saw the first crack. She wasn't looking for it. She was riding her bike home from school when she passed the old church on the corner of Weaver Street, a building long abandoned, slated for demolition for as long as anyone could remember. It had never been repainted. Never boarded. Never noticed. Except this time, as she passed, she saw something strange. A window, high above the nave, had splintered. Not shattered. Split. Down the center. Not randomly. Symmetrically. And inside the split, she saw a spiral. Not painted. Not drawn. Grown. Faint. Barely visible. Etched into the rotted wood beneath the frame, its grooves soft like veins, its pattern familiar. Too familiar. Myra froze. Because she had drawn that exact spiral in her notebook 2 nights earlier. In a dream sketch. A place she'd never been. A place she now stood before. She left her bike on the curb and walked through the broken church doors. Inside, dust, rot, light through broken beams. But also, geometry. The pews had shifted. Not fallen, moved. Arranged. In a perfect spiral, circling what used to be the pulpit. And on the cracked altar stone was a single phrase, scrawled in ash. Roots don't need forests. She stepped back. Suddenly breathless. The notebook in her backpack burned. She pulled it out. Open to the middle. A blank page was now filled. A drawing of the church's spiral layout. Identical. Unlabeled. And underneath it, 3 words. It watches still. That night, she didn't sleep. Not for fear. For clarity. She remembered Evelyn's eyes. The notebook. The leaf. The story passed not to curse her, but to warn her. The whisperer was gone. The forest was ash. But the memory? Had grown teeth of a different kind. It had learned to hide in plain sight. Not in the woods. Not in dreams. But in architecture. Design. Symbols embedded in cityscapes. Every spiral staircase. Every roundabout road. Every cul-de-sac where homes curled inward toward an unseen center. They were no longer remnants. They were echoes. And echoes always try to find a mouth. Over the next weeks, Myra saw more. A cracked sidewalk in a perfect spiral. A culvert that echoed with a name she hadn't spoken. a construction site where the concrete foundation mimicked the altar's teeth. She mapped them, connected them, realized they formed a shape. A vast spiral, not inward, but expanding, growing, like roots beneath a city. Not a forest anymore, but infrastructure. The memory had adapted. It didn't need worship. It needed designers. Builders who unknowingly recreated the shapes it once inhabited. It was hollow. It was quiet. But it was everywhere. Myra sat in her room one night, surrounded by blueprints, sketches, and symbols. She opened Evelyn's notebook again. Still blank, except for one new line. "You're not the bearer. You're the boundary." She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But she knew the memory had not returned. It had simply changed its strategy. And now, it didn't want to be heard. It wanted to be lived in. Chapter 29, The Architect's Folly. The building was called The Haven. A state-of-the-art living complex. A marvel of modern design. Circular walkways. Interior gardens. A layout described in glossy brochures as organic, flowing, immersive. Myra knew better. The first time she saw the blueprint, taped behind a glass panel at City Hall, her stomach twisted. Not from fear. From recognition. It wasn't a floor plan. It was a ritual. A spiral 13 layers deep, with a hollow center. Each apartment numbered not sequentially, but in a pattern of primes and negatives. The elevators arranged in rings. The ventilation system mimicking the branching lungs of a forest. She traced her fingers along the outline and realized with a chill, this wasn't architecture. It was an altar. Disguised as a home. The lead architect was a man named Reed Weller. He was young. Genius level. Praised for natural intuition in structural flow. He claimed the idea for the Haven had come to him in a dream. A spiral staircase that breathed. Myra met him once, outside the construction site. He was sketching something into his notebook. Not a design. A spiral. Over and over. When he looked up at her, his eyes were glassy. Tired. Like he hadn't slept in years. "You ever hear of a tree," he asked, "that remembers its own forest after it's been cut down?" She shook her head. He smiled. "Neither did I. But I dream about it. A lot." That night, she returned to the site. Climbed the fence. Moved through the unfinished halls. It was hollow still, no tenants. Just cement bones and echoing pipes. But the place felt alive. Not haunted. Not evil. Just expectant. Like it was waiting for someone to complete the loop. At the center of the building was a wide, circular atrium. Unfinished. Exposed to the sky. The center of the spiral. The heart. Myra stepped into it. And the wind stopped. Completely. A voice behind her. "You brought the leaf, didn't you?" She turned. Reed stood at the edge of the concrete ring. Smiling. His hands were shaking. "Evelyn's leaf," he said. "The one you picked up. I've seen it in my head every night. Even before the first draft. That shape, it told me how to build this." He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket. Held it up. The original design. Not blue ink. But red spirals drawn in blood. "They don't want to be gods anymore," he said. "They want to be hospitable." She tried to run. He stopped her. "No," he whispered. "You don't get it. I didn't build the spiral." He stepped closer. "They used me to build the boundary." Myra backed toward the center. "They're not trying to come back." His voice cracked. "They're trying to trap you here." The realization hit her like ice. The Haven wasn't a vessel for the Whisperer. It was a prison. For her. She was the last with the memory. The only thread left. And the spiral, the building, was meant to seal her in forever so the story could finally rest. But it had been built too late. She already knew too much. She wasn't a bearer anymore. She was the boundary. And the only way to stop it now was to collapse the spiral. She climbed to the upper floor, pulled the fire alarm. No one came, site was empty. She smashed the electrical box, lit the blueprint on fire. The flames raced, and the spiral screamed. Not aloud. Inside her, the shape tried to reshape her, bend her back into a story. But she resisted, because Evelyn had prepared her for this. She was not a victim. She was the full stop. The haven burned. The spiral cracked. And Reed, sobbing, vanished into smoke. Not dead. Just unwritten. Erased. A part of the story that no longer had a place. When it was over, Myra stood in the ashes. The wind returned. Normal. Unremarkable. She opened her notebook. One line remained. You are the last design. Make no new shapes. Chapter 30, The Last Spiral. The wind carried ash across the field where the haven once stood. The ground beneath was scorched and blackened, a charred spiral barely visible beneath the soot. But it was broken. Split down the center. Unraveled. Myra stood at the edge, notebook in hand. It was heavier than it should have been. Not with pages. With possibility. Inside were fragments. Words she had written. Memories she hadn't lived. Symbols Evelyn had once buried in fire and silence. The last seed of the story. The last spiral. She walked away from the site, down an empty road that led nowhere in particular. The world felt still. Not waiting. Not haunting. Just watching. And she felt it, something deep and real and human. Peace. Not complete. Not eternal. But earned. She reached a lone tree at the edge of a dried creek bed. It looked like any tree, except for one thing, it leaned slightly, as if bowing toward her. At its base was a patch of moss, round and soft. She Saturday. Opened the notebook. And for the first time since Evelyn's death, she turned to the final page. It was blank. Except for a faint spiral pressed into the paper, barely visible. Not threatening. Not alive. Just there. Waiting. She thought about what she could do. Burn it. Bury it. Seal it in a vault. Forget it. But each of those was an action. And stories, she now knew, lived in action. So instead, she did something different. Something no one before her had dared to do. Nothing. She closed the notebook gently, tied it shut with twine, and placed it beneath the roots of the tree. No ceremony. No burial. Just placement. She whispered, "Rest," and left it there. Myra never returned. She lived a long life. Quiet. Kind. Unremarkable. She never wrote again. She never dreamed of spirals. But every so often, she'd pass a child on a sidewalk, drawing circles in chalk, and pause. Not in fear. Not in warning. But in recognition. Because stories don't end. They settle. And memory doesn't die. It sleeps, waiting for the one who listens.